Chapter 999. In the previous chapter, Sangsang said that the Buddha said that when the mountain has no edges and the heaven and earth are together, he can see the Buddha. The original song of the UFO school was Mountain Without Hills. I didn't think much about it, so I wrote Mountain Without Edges. Was it influenced by the song? Thanks to reader Zhu Jingyan for the correction. No one knew where the voice came from or why it rang in the sky. But the next moment, everyone knew that it was Haotian's voice. Only Haotian's voice could be so majestic. Only Haotian's voice could reflect such a vivid picture in the consciousness of the devout Haotian believers and touch their souls. Everyone on the cliff plateaus and the front plateau of Peach Mountain knelt down with their foreheads touching the ground. They wished they could bury themselves in the dust so that they could show their respect and love for Haotian. Hierarch Xiongchimo was standing between the gauze curtains and leading the believers to pray. His figure looked very tall in the light. Hearing the voice, he immediately threw himself to the ground, as humble as a dog. It was said that his voice was as magnificent as thunder. But compared to the voice that rang in the sky, it was nothing, even blasphemy. In front of a stone house in a remote corner of the cliff plateau, the Abbey Dean left the wheelchair and knelt down. He supported his body with his thin arms and trembled. But his expression was calm and proud. The middle-aged priest finally left the wheelchair and knelt behind the Abbey Dean. Long Qing knelt even further behind. His face was as pale as snow and his eyes were full of fear. He knew clearly what the Abbey Dean had done was disrespectful to Haotian. Now that Haotian had left the chessboard of the Buddha, how could he not be afraid when the power of heaven came back to the human world? Sangsang's voice broke through the clouds and fell on Peach Mountain. It resounded between heaven and earth, and was reflected by the sky and the ground. It spread so far that even the whole continent could hear it. Countless people were awakened by the voice from the sky. An old man leaned against the wall and looked at the gray sky. His turbid eyes were full of confusion. He wondered what was going on this year. Was the spring thunder going to strike again? Why did it sound like someone was talking? Some children rushed to the window of the study room, pointing at the sky and talking excitedly. Their chattering sounded like a group of birds. The teacher, who was sleepy in spring, was woken up. He picked up the ruler and prepared to teach these naughty students a lesson. The children said in unison that the sky had spoken, but they were beaten a few more times. The small town at the border of the Song Nation and the Yen Nation also heard the sound coming from the sky. The people rushed to the only long street in the town. They looked at the sky uneasily, not knowing what had happened. In the butcher's shop, the butcher hid his face and head under the chopping board with his broad oiled knife raised high above his head. Hoof bones kept falling from the chopping board, and every time one fell, his body would tremble. The drunkard was more afraid than the butcher. The drunkard sat in the tea-house and kept drinking from the flagon. Even though he could hold his liquor well, his eyes became blurred, but his face did not turn red. Instead, it was terribly pale. The butcher did not participate in the Abbey Dean's plot against Haotian, but he did. He watched Haotian and Ning Ke enter the Xiankong temple, and even stopped the academy from breaking the chessboard. Now that Haotian had returned and asked the human world if it had sinned, how could he not be afraid? Other than getting herself drunk, what other way could she do to keep him from losing his mind? Chao Xiaoshu stood at the door of the tea-house and looked at the gray sky. He asked confusedly, "What happened?" The drunkard finally put down the flagon and said in a trembling voice, "This is something you can't understand. You'd better stay away from me. Otherwise, the power of heaven is unpredictable, and you may die at any time." Chao Xiaoshu turned around and looked at him with a complicated expression. The drunkard kept drinking, trying to get himself drunk. He said vaguely, "We are all doing this for her own good. But what if she doesn't appreciate it?" Taoism seemed to have done nothing when Sangsang was trapped in the Buddha's chessboard. But it was exactly because of this that they had sinned. They saw Haotian in danger without saying anything, which was a great sin. Moreover, Sang Sang figured out what Taoism was trying to do after the incident. She was asking the human world for a crime, and she was asking the guilty ones. The most guilty one was the Abbey Dean, Chen Mao. Long Qing, who was kneeling behind him, was pale and sweating profusely. The middle-aged priest was trembling slightly, as if he could no longer maintain his kneeling posture. The Abbey Dean was already a cripple. His cultivation state was not comparable to that of Long Qing and the middle-aged priest, but he was calmer than them and even had a smile on his face. He looked at the sky and said with a smile, "I am not guilty." Sang Sang's voice sounded again in the air in front of the cliff plateau. "You colluded with the Buddhism sect and tried to make me sleep. That is a great sin of disrespect. How can you defend yourself?" This time, she did not let the whole human world hear it. Only those on the cliff plateau could hear it. Therefore, they were even more frightened. Many divine priests and deacons were shocked and could not hold on any longer. They fainted. The Abbey Dean said, "Absolutely not." Sang Sang said, "You don't admit that you wanted to kill me?" The Abbey Dean said, "I wanted to kill Sang Sang, not Haotian." Sang Sang said, "I am Haotian." The Abbey Dean said, "I believe in Haotian, not the woman named Sang Sang." Sang Sang said, "What if I cannot wake up in the chessboard?" The Abbey Dean said, "Haotian is omnipotent. Moreover, this is your will. I am just carrying out your will. I believe you should understand my piety now." Sang Sang's voice did not come for a long time. The spring breeze blew the peach blossoms on the mountain. It was silent. No one dared to make a sound. After a long time, her voice came again. "As a mortal, it is a sin to defy the will of heaven." The Abbey Dean said calmly, "If it is a sin, I am willing to commit a heinous sin. Since you are my follower, you should listen to my will. The will of Haotian has never changed. It is to protect the order of the world at all costs." "Even if I change my mind?" "Yes. Because outside the world is the cold underworld. If you change your mind, it means the destruction of the human race." "That makes sense." Sang Sang's voice did not come again after these two words. After a long time, Long Qing dared to move his eyes away from the ground soaked with sweat. He looked at the Abbey Dean not far away, his eyes full of awe and confusion. Haotian was worthy of awe. He could still talk so calmly when Haotian was accusing him. The Abbey Dean was even more worthy of awe. He could not even understand where the Abbey Dean got his courage from. The Abbey Dean stood up with difficulty. He looked at the far north and the direction of Chang'an. After a long time of silence, he said, "Let the sacrificial ceremony continue. Haotian is going back to the divine kingdom." Different from Long Qing's imagination, the Abbey Dean was not afraid of talking to or even debating with Haotian, because he was the one who knew Haotian best in the world. Haotian had to reason with human beings because she was the reason. On the city wall of Chang'an, Sang Sang thought about the world Ning Ke described and confirmed that what Chen Mao said made sense. Just as he said, this was her will. Reasonable? What kind of logic is that? Ning Ke said, "If this is a sin, am I not afraid of committing a heinous sin? Don't you feel disgusted by this typical non-mainstream tone? How can you hear the reason?" Sang Sang said, "If there was no reason, he would be dead." Ning Ke said, "Although Taoism did not do anything, it is obvious that he knew that the Buddha's chessboard would bring you danger. But he did not say anything. What is the reason?" Sang Sang suddenly said, "Have you ever thought that I wanted to enter the Buddha's chessboard? What he did was just carrying out my will. What crime did he commit?" The spring wind on the city wall suddenly became very cold. Ning Ke turned around to avoid the spring wind and the question because he really felt cold. Sang Sang looked at him quietly and said, "You understand." Ning Ke reached out to touch her forehead and said, "You are sick." Sang Sang smiled and said, "Do you have any medicine?" Ning Ke said seriously, "11th brother is best at making medicine. Can I get some for you?" It was all a joke, because he only dared to joke at this moment. The conversation between Sang Sang and the Abbey Dean made his heart colder and colder. Even her smile could not bring him warmth. Her smile was so calm and indifferent. As I said, you want me to enter Chang'an because you want me to build the God-stunning array. You want to break the sky and help the headmaster to defeat me. I know everything you are thinking about. You can't lie to me. Sang Sang looked at him and said calmly, "If you are guilty, what should you be guilty of?" Ning Ke gradually calmed down and looked at her. He said, "Don't forget, I also know everything you are thinking about. You want to use the God-stunning array to reopen the gate of Haotian's divine kingdom. You can't lie to me." Sang Sang said, "You are lying after all." Ning Ke said, "You have lied to me more than I have lied to you. Just like what we said in the academy yesterday, you have lied to my youth, so don't lie to my feelings." Sang Sang said, "Feelings? I know what it is, but I didn't lie to you." Ning Ke said expressionlessly, "You can't get rid of the sense of worldly affairs that the headmaster left in your body. You can't cut off the affection between you and the human world and me. So you can't go back. You and I traveled the human world together, but we couldn't find a way. Until we went to the Lank Temple and saw the broken Buddha statue on Hua Mountain. You understood the trap that Buddha set for you. So you resolutely went to the trap and got yourself poisoned by the 3 poisons of greed, anger, and obsession. You went to Buddha and said that you wanted to kill Buddha, but it was all a lie. We went to the Xiankong Temple and were trapped in Buddha's chessboard. It was your own choice. Because by getting rid of the 3 poisons of greed, anger, and obsession, you got rid of the sense of worldly affairs." He said bitterly, "Buddha thought he had calculated the cause and effect. He didn't expect that in your eyes, he was just a sharp carving knife. You wanted to use this carving knife to cut off your flesh and get rid of the dust on your body so that you can return to the divine kingdom. But have you ever thought about what it means to me?" Sang Sang said, "This is a war. Why don't you understand? These things seem to have nothing to do with me. But the one who spent a long time with you in the chessboard and got you poisoned by greed, anger, and obsession is me. The one who picked up the carving knife and turned you into a Buddha, helped you get rid of the 3 poisons of greed, anger, and obsession, and got rid of the sense of worldly affairs is me. It's me, it's me, it's still me." Ning Ke looked at her and said with a smile, "The 1,000 years in the chessboard were my feelings. You used me and cheated my feelings. My dear, why don't you understand?" His smile was very light as water, and his emotions were very thick as blood. Now, the story related to the chessboard and the cause and effect finally came to light. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1000. Yes, that was the truth. Sang Sang couldn't get rid of the secular world in her, so she looked for Buddha and came to the world in the chessboard. In that world, she was deeply in love with Ning Ke and had the 3 poisons of greed, aversion, and obsession. Ning Ke wanted to save her, so he had to get rid of the 3 poisons of greed, aversion, and obsession in her body. Greed, aversion, and obsession were the emotions and the secular world. Buddhism cultivation was the 3 poisons of greed and obsession. The Academy didn't expect this, and Buddha didn't expect things to develop like this. No one could guess what she would do in countless reincarnations, because God's will was unpredictable. Buddha saw the cause and effect, and she was the cause and effect. She used Buddha's plan to break the Academy's plan and find the possibility in the impossible. This was Haotian's great wisdom and Ning Ke's great pain. Ning Ke stood on the city wall and looked at the spring breeze. He said indifferently, in the small courtyard in Chaoyang City, "Did you feel happy when you saw me happily buying vegetables and cooking every day? I have called many people idiots in my life. I thought they were really idiots, but now I think I am the stupidest idiot." Sang Sang walked to him and looked at the world in the spring breeze with her hands behind her back. She said, I didn't lie, because I didn't know it either. Only when the cause and effect are fixed can I understand my will. Ning Ke sneered. Do you think I can believe this? Sang Sang said. It doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. As I said in the academy yesterday, no one knows how things will develop, even I don't know. This is the real stroke of God. It is indeed a stroke of God. In fact, during the last years in the chessboard, I vaguely guessed something, but I didn't want to believe it, so I never asked you. During those years, I practiced Buddhism on that mountain. Although you were on my back, I was always alone. I was so lonely that I wanted to die. Ning Ke looked at the pedestrians on the city wall and the busy market and said, Every time you woke up, you refused to talk to me. At first, I thought you were tired, but later I found that it was because you didn't want to talk to me. I was very disappointed and began to be vigilant, because it proved that your emotions were fading, or that you were afraid of something. What are you afraid of? He turned to look at Sang Sang and said calmly, You are afraid to be with me, so you can't bear to cut off the connection with the human world? If it's this kind of fear, I'll feel somewhat relieved. Sang Sang didn't answer his question, but said, Since you have vaguely guessed it and started to be vigilant, why didn't you say anything or do anything? God can predict everything. It's scary, but I'm not afraid, because the God-stunning array is still in my hands. You shouldn't have told me this. I'm not sure that you've gotten rid of the worldly will in your body. The Academy might use the God-stunning array to blast the sky, and then you could use it to return to the Divine Kingdom. But now it's impossible. Ning Ke said expressionlessly, Even if you become the cold and heartless Haotian, as long as you can't return to the Divine Kingdom, you can only return to your original state. Just like the days we spent in the Divine Hall of Light, we will inevitably continue to be entangled together, and we will still be the same pair of burnt papers. Sang Sang said, Since I told you this, it means that even without the God-stunning array, I have other ways to leave the human world and return to the Divine Kingdom. Ning Ke said, A cow can be boasted to the sky, but a pig can't. Sang Sang said, It's a black pig. Ning Ke said, No matter what color the pig is, you can't go back. Sang Sang said, In the world of the chessboard, I experienced the suffering of the worldly will, cut off the connection with the human world, and saw the big ship with the divine will. Ning Ke felt a little uneasy when he thought of the horrible big ship in the nirvana. Buddha is different from your teacher. Your teacher merged with the human world, and even I couldn't find him. Buddha, on the other hand, gathered people to help him, and created another world without my eyes. Both of them are great divine senses. I can't merge with the human world, so I can only use the Buddha's method to obtain the power to open up the world. Sang Sang said, The power of all people is faith. I'm the Lord of the world, and I have countless devout believers. However, for tens of thousands of years, I've been indifferently overlooking the divine kingdom. The power comes from all people, but I've never thought about how to use and strengthen this power. In this aspect, I've learned a lot from the Buddha. Ning Ke said, Is it that big ship? Sang Sang said, The Buddha delivers all people from suffering, and all people help him to cross the nirvana realm. I want all people to deliver me, so I have to deliver all people first, and then I can take the big ship to the nirvana realm. Ning Ke asked, Where is your nirvana realm? Sang Sang said, I came from the divine kingdom, so the nirvana realm is naturally in the divine kingdom. Ning Ke looked at the gray sky and said nothing. Sang Sang reached out to somewhere in the south. The academy was dozens of miles away from the city. The indigo lion, which was taken out of the chessboard by Sang Sang, was confronting the big white goose by the stream. Its hair stood up like swords, and it kept growling to threaten, but it dared not to act rashly. It looked at the meadow in the distance from time to time. The big white goose was a bit tricky for it, and there was an old yellow bull dozing on the meadow. It knew very well that if the old yellow bull opened its eyes, it would be doomed. The indigo lion couldn't understand why it could meet so many terrible fellows as soon as it came out of the chessboard. It was completely different from the information it got from the chessboard. This world was too scary. Suddenly, an invisible force broke through the cloud gate array, landed on the cliff plateau, grabbed the indigo lion, and disappeared. The big white goose looked up to the sky and found that it couldn't see the abominable newcomer anymore. It shook its head in boredom and went to the stream to take a bath. The indigo lion appeared on the city wall in Song Song's hand. Its mane was pulled painfully, and it was worried that it would really become a bald donkey, but it dared not to resist. Sang Sang waved her sleeves to the outside of the city wall, and a breeze came to the human world. During the Right to Light, the human world also had such a breeze. But compared with that year, the breeze today was quieter, gentler, and had more breath of life. The breeze came to the divine halls of West Hill first. The peach blossoms in the valley were fluttering in the wind, and instantly became more beautiful. The believers kneeling on the cliff plateau and the front yard were suddenly refreshed by the breeze. All the negative emotions such as anxiety, fear, sadness, and despair were all purified. The blind felt that the world in front of them was gradually brightening, and the deaf faintly heard some sounds. The sounds came from the lips of countless believers. It was the sound of chanting scriptures. Under the leadership of the hierarch of the divine halls of West Hill, more than 100,000 divine priests, deacons, and devout believers kept chanting the scriptures loudly. The words in the scriptures were beautiful, and the rhymes overlapped, forming an extraordinarily sacred feeling. It was the final chapter of the divine halls of West Hill, the Sutra of transcending the world and ascending to immortality. The spring breeze filled the human world, and the chanting spread everywhere. Tens of thousands of Taoist temples in various countries and countless Taoists began to chant the scriptures that everyone was familiar with. The spring breeze lingered in the forest, gently brushing the hanging clouds, and finally turned into rain. The rain fell to the human world with a golden luster, but it was extremely clear when it fell to the ground. The spring rain fell on the peach mountain, wetting the woods and darkening the color of the peach blossoms. It fell in a remote place of the Revelation Institute, and a pile of dry firewood in the corner was also wet. A skinny little priest was taking shelter from the rain. He was the most inconspicuous servant in the divine halls. Even though it was such an important sacrificial ceremony, no one had informed him. He was a forgotten existence. Seeing that the pile of firewood was wet, the little priest was a little anxious. He covered his face with his sleeves and ran out. He wanted to move the pile of firewood into the kitchen, and did not care that he was wet by the rain. The clear rain fell on him and turned into countless mottled golden light spots. Then it seeped through his dirty Taoist robe and began to slowly nourish his body and Taoist heart. In the small town between Song and Yen, the drunkard held the door and looked at the rain falling from the sky. His right hand holding the flagon was slightly trembling, and he let the rain wet his face, whose age could not be guessed. The rain fell on the broken eaves of the butcher's shop, flowed down along the cracks, dripped on the chopping board, and wet the white and fat pig trotters. Then the butcher's face was wet with blood. They clearly felt that the filth that they suppressed in the deepest part of their souls was washed away by the rain falling from the sky. Their rotten bodies even showed a fresh vitality. The drunkard left the tea-house, and the butcher walked out of the butcher's shop. The two came to the only straight street in the town and stood at the two ends of the street. Standing in the rain, they were moved and determined. The spring breeze filled the human world, and the spring breeze turned into rain. Naturally, the rain fell everywhere. Both the West Hill Divine Kingdom and the coast of the East Sea were covered by the drizzle. Even the depths of the wilderness in the far north had a rain. The rain fell on the golden tent and made a pitter sound, as if someone was casually beating a broken war drum. The wilderness was so quiet and the sound was so clear. Chanyu, with a solemn expression, knelt in the rain with all his wives, sons, and dozens of generals of the royal palace, and kept praying for the Tingri heaven to grant them courage. The national master and dozens of high priests knelt on the highest meadow, and stretched out their hands to receive the rain and the blessing from the sky. The national master's aged face was washed by the rain, and it was visible to the naked eye that he became younger. The bodies of the high priests were also wrapped in a faint golden light. The national master slowly closed his eyes and knelt in the rain, quietly feeling the vitality and the unfathomable power in the rain. He was peaceful and full of awe. It was also raining in the Xiankong temple. Junemo looked at the iron sword that was soaked in the rain and slightly raised his eyebrows. The iron sword was soaked in the rain and became darker. It was plated with a layer of luster and became much sharper. His clothes were soaked and he became much sharper. Junemo knew why. A few years ago, he said in front of her that he would not accept the gift from Haotian, but he had no choice but to accept what she wanted to do. On the wilderness outside the pit, the big black horse lowered its head and dragged the heavy carriage, walking in the messy poplar forest. Suddenly, a spring rain fell and wet its body, and all the tiredness and loneliness disappeared. It squinted at the depths of the spring rain, and suddenly felt some reluctance. Similar scenes happened everywhere in the human world. Some cultivators cried in the rain. He, who could not enter the see-through realm after decades of hard cultivation, finally crossed the threshold today. Some Taoist cultivators who lived in seclusion in the deep mountains even reached the knowing destiny state overnight. Those who were seriously ill were saved and slowly woke up. Those who were about to die were saved and no longer suffered. They peacefully returned to the divine kingdom. Those who believed in Haotian would be rewarded, because this spring rain was her gift to the human world. After the spring rain, the little Taoist in the Revelation Institute would no longer be a servant. He would become a genius in the cultivation world and the most valued powerhouse of the new generation in Taoism. The drunkard and the butcher would no longer linger on. They would live a fresh life in the human world before they were taken to the divine kingdom. The national master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court and many powerhouses of Taoism were cleansed by the rain and became more powerful. Buddha only saved those who believed in him. Not everyone could receive Haotian's gift. The monks in the Xiankong temple were very embarrassed by the spring rain. The abbé dean, who was kneeling in the rain in front of the stone house on the cliff plateau of the divine halls of Westhill, was still a cripple, and his face was pale from the cold rain. All the followers of Taoism benefited as long as they were sincere believers of Haotian. The abbé dean was the leader of Taoism in the human world, but he was excluded from the process. He knew that it was not because his faith in Haotian was not strong enough, but because Haotian still remembered his disrespect. Looking at the human world in the spring rain, the abbé dean smiled bitterly, but his eyes were still firm. As long as the human world was still peaceful, it was not a big deal even if he was abandoned by Haotian. Chun Pippi and Tang Xiaotang in Linkong, tens of thousands of followers of the new stream in front of the South Jin Imperial Palace, Yi Su in the shabby Taoist temple in the Kingdom of Song, and dozens of neighbors who were listening to his preaching, what were they thinking? The spring rain also fell in Chang'an. The clear rain was full of vitality, which was a mercy to the human world. Therefore, the God-stunning array did not react. Xiao Chao slept in the House of Red Sleeves for a whole day and night. Mistress Jian invited all the imperial doctors in the palace, but none of them knew what was wrong with her. She woke up when the spring rain fell. She walked to the window and leaned against the railing. She looked at the raindrops falling from the eaves and thanked them silently in her heart. Xingjing and his wife also woke up to the sound of the spring rain. They walked to the rain pavilion in the garden hand in hand. Looking at the spring rain, they felt that something had happened and felt sad for no reason. The spring rain fell on the human world. Haotian blessed hundreds of millions of followers and delivered all living beings from suffering. Their faith became firmer and even more fanatical. Countless invisible spiritual auras were born from the palaces and huts, and from the souls of all living beings. They flew toward the rain and went straight to the sky. This was the return of all living beings to Haotian. Hundreds of millions of pure spiritual auras came to the south of Chang'an. Regardless of their strength, they blended together harmoniously, disturbing the rain and brightening the dark clouds. On top of the city wall, Ning Ke stood beside Sang Sang. He first smelled a very light fragrance, and then the whole human world smelled it. Then, there was the sound of exquisite and ethereal music. In the strange fragrance and divine music, countless golden petals fell down. Countless spiritual auras lit up the clouds, and a huge ship appeared faintly. The ship was also golden. Countless followers condensed their psyches into this big ship, ready to send Haotian back to the divine kingdom. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 1001. Sang Sang's feet left the city wall and floated toward the big ship in the cloud. Ning Ke hugged her leg and did not let her go. Just like many years ago in the wilderness, when the clouds broke and the gate of Haotian's divine kingdom opened, she floated to the sky, and he stood on the field and hugged her leg without hesitation. At that time, Sang Sang floated to the sky with him, and it was the headmaster who grabbed his leg in the end. Now the headmaster was no longer in the world. He did not want her to leave, but how could he fight against the whole world? Sang Sang floated away from the city wall and into the sky. Ning Ke did not make her stay. He only kept her shoes, the cloth shoes that he bought for her. Sang Sang landed on the bow of the ship and threw the indigo lion into the clouds. The indigo lion grew in the wind and became thousands of feet tall. The hair on its neck shook and it roared. The clouds broke and the sky appeared. It struggled to drag the big ship to the sky. Chang'an responded. The God-stunning array released a fierce killing intent that seemed to be able to tear the sky apart. It condensed in the streets and buildings of the city and was ready to attack at any time. Countless Tangs came out of their houses and poured into the street. They looked at the bright sky in the south, the incredible giant ship and the indigo lion in the bow, and their faces were full of awe and fear. The God-stunning array did not attack the giant ship because it was outside the city. Although the Tangs in the streets were frightened, no one put down their weapons. Some even started to pick up stones. Sang Sang stood on the bow with her hands behind her back. The infinite light projected her tall figure on the ground, making the top of the city wall dim, just like Ning Ke's mood at this time. The indigo lion dragged the big ship out of the clouds and flew to the sky. It was slow at first, but it was obviously speeding up. Somewhere in the sky, a golden line appeared. The golden line was not the gate of Haotian's divine kingdom. The gate of the divine kingdom had been destroyed by the headmaster years ago. The golden line was the shore that Sang Sang wanted to reach. As long as there was a shore, there was no need for a door. If she had supreme wisdom, she would be able to reach the other shore. Her wisdom had long been proven by the headmaster of Academy, Buddha, Ning Ke, and even herself. Just like that? Could it be that everything is fake? Ning Ke stood on top of the city wall and looked at the giant ship in the sky. He asked expressionlessly, "The Buddha I have cultivated for you for decades is fake? Is it a lie that I brought you up with all my effort? That famine was fake? The entire Min Mountain was fake? Is the city of Wei fake or Chang'an fake?" Sang Sang stood at the bow of the ship in silence without turning around. "Let's not talk about Min Mountain, let's not talk about the past. We've been together for 1,000 years, but you don't even give me a cup of tea and want to leave. Do you think it's appropriate?" Ning Ke looked at the ship that was getting further and further away, and said with a smile with difficulty. Sang Sang stood at the bow of the ship, still silent. Ning Ke slowly held the hilt of the iron cutlass and stared at her back. He said word by word in a low voice, "I don't think it's appropriate, so don't even think about leaving." With a swoosh, he pulled out his iron saber and slashed at the huge ship in the sky. He and Sang Sang cultivated Buddhism in the Buddha's chessboard together. Sang Sang understood the method of mercy and salvation, but he also learned to condense the will of all living beings. The incomparably majestic chi of heaven and earth was gathered by the God-stunning array and poured into his body through the array eye pestle. Countless cutlasses in the city flew out of their sheaths and thousands of knives appeared in the world again. 2 extremely sharp knife marks rose from the city wall of Chang and then came to the sky in a flash, forming a clear character, human. The place where the 2 strokes met was the bow of the ship. Years ago in Chang'an, the Tangs were united. He used the power of the God-stunning array and gathered the will of millions of people to write a character, human, in the sky and killed the Abbey Dean. In the Buddha's chessboard, he cultivated Buddhism on the peak and obtained the faith of thousands of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. With the power of Sangsang, he wrote a character, human, in the dark sky and broke the 1,000-year dilemma. This was the 3rd time he wrote this character. What would the result be? Ning Ke knew that his knife talisman couldn't cut the giant ship under Song Song's feet because it was a boat of faith. So he cut the space before the bow of the ship. There was an invisible rope between the indigo lion and the bow of the ship. Ning Ke wanted to cut the invisible rope. 2 knife marks appeared in the sky and covered the giant ship. Sangsang finally turned around, her expression unchanged. She stretched out her finger and pointed at the knife mark. She stretched out a finger. The finger was very slender, and the surface of the fingertip was small. Ning Ke's 2 knife marks were about to cut the whole sky. The place where they met was a few miles wide. However, her fingertips were able to envelop the space within a radius of several miles. Countless airflows sputtered and the bright clouds were torn into countless pieces. The big ship continued to move forward steadily. She broke Ning Ke's human talisman with 1 finger. The 2 strokes gradually moved away and finally fell apart in the sky. They scattered into countless talismans like a chaotic wind, and then were purified into nothingness by the light. Looking at this scene, Ning Ke was silent. At the moment when the iron knife was cut, he felt that the 2 knife marks were not pure enough, and it was very difficult to write the human talisman. But he couldn't understand why. Because of fear? Yes, no matter how immortal the Abbey Dean was, in the eyes of the strong Tangs, he was still a human being. But Haotian was Haotian. How could they not be afraid? There were millions of people in Chang, and in the streets, and many of them had weapons in their hands. They all wanted to protect their country, but not all of them dared to attack Haotian. If the will was not united, the human talisman couldn't be fully exerted. If the will of the people could not be united, how could the city withstand the finger of heaven's power? In the chessboard, you could write that character and break the sky because I was in your body and those Buddhas were worshipping you. You have to know that even in Chang'an, all living beings are still my believers. How can they obey your will? I'm no longer here, so how can you write those words again? Sangsang stood at the bow of the boat and looked at him calmly. She said, "But I am very pleased that you can comprehend the will of the people. Look at the boat under me carefully. Maybe you will comprehend more." Ning Ke was silent for a while and said, "Pleased my ass? Comprehend my ass?" Sangsang said, "When we meet again, it will be a matter of life and death. If you want to defeat me, you have to learn how to write that character. Then we will meet again." Ning Ke said expressionlessly, "By that time, I might have died of old age." Sangsang looked at him quietly and was about to turn away. Just then, Ning Ke suddenly said, "Do you think this is the end?" Sangsang slightly frowned. Ning Ke laughed and said, "There was no butcher in Min Mountain back then, and I didn't let you eat any meat with hair on it. I can't beat you, and you can't run away either. Don't forget, I've been losing to you for so many years, but when can you really leave me?" After saying this, he turned his wrist and stabbed the knife into his chest. He stabbed very hard, and the dark and sharp knife directly pierced through his hard flesh and bones. It went deep into his chest and pointed at his beating heart. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 1002. There was a burst of laughter on the city wall. It was really painful. His face became abnormally pale, but he was still laughing as he looked at the big ship in the sky. He was laughing very happily, miserably, resolutely, and even a little crazy. Sang Sang stood at the bow of the ship and looked at the man on the city wall below. She looked calm and did not get angry because of his disrespect, nor did she feel disgusted because of his existence. She felt that this feeling of calmness was very good and very powerful. Even if she thought that she was calm, it was still calm. After calmness came silence, and silence meant eternity. She thought that she could keep calm, but looking at Ning Kei's pale face and the blood that kept flowing out of his chest, she did not know why she also felt a little pain in her chest. Was it an illusion or an illusion? Sang Sang erased this question from her mind with unimaginable willpower, but she could not stop her brows from slightly frowning. She looked at Ning Kei quietly and suddenly asked, "Doesn't it hurt?" Ning Kei looked at his chest and the blade that had penetrated deep into his flesh. He squeezed out a miserable smile and said, "A man should be tough on himself." Sang Sang murmured, "But it still hurts." Ning Kei's fingers tightened and the iron knife was inserted deeper into his chest. Dozens of beads of sweat dripped down his pale cheek. He looked up at her and said, "I am a real man." Sang Sang looked at him and said with pity, "Does it really not hurt?" Ning Kei's right hand, which was holding the hilt, trembled slightly. The blade made a longer cut in his chest, and blood flowed down like a waterfall. He said, "In the West Hill Divine Palace, my flesh and blood have been cut by you countless times. I have long been used to it. It's nothing new. Now I think I should thank you." Sang Sang asked him 3 times if it hurt, but he did not answer. How could it not hurt when the knife was inserted into his heart? But his heart had already been in extreme pain and had become numb. Yes, as long as you are a human, you will feel pain. The pity disappeared in an instant and Sang Sang said expressionlessly, "You are a human and you have the 3 poisons of greed, anger, and obsession in your body. You have been on the chessboard for thousands of years, and your love is deeply rooted. My poison is gone. What about yours?" Ning Kei looked at her and laughed again. His laughter became more and more indifferent. "Throughout my travels in the human world, you've always wanted me to understand what emotion and love are. Up until now, I still haven't completely understood it, but I'm at least clear about one thing. Emotion and love are sometimes not acceptance, but giving. Everyone has a heart that can't bear to hurt others. The more you've given me, the more you can't bear to hurt me." Sang Sang looked at him and said calmly, "I want to leave. If you want to stop me, you can only kill yourself. Then I will die. Do you really have the heart to do that?" Ning Kei laughed and said, "What you said is not comprehensive. Love and affection are not one-sided acceptance or one-sided giving. They are shared. I really don't want you to die, but are you willing to watch me die? If you really are Haotian heartless, you should have left earlier. Why are you telling me so much?" As he spoke, he coughed up blood. His teeth and pale cheeks were covered in bloodstains. He looked abnormally ferocious, but hidden within was a will and determination that even the heavens could not ignore. Sang Sang was silent for a long time. Then she smiled and said, "What you said makes sense. Since the final outcome is separation, I shouldn't say so much." The spring wind blew the indigo robe, and the flowers on it gradually bloomed. The indigo lion walked on the clouds, and the big ship slowly moved toward the distant golden line in the sky. She stood at the bow of the ship and no longer looked at him. Ning Kei looked at the big ship in the sky and her back. He said with a pale face, "You know I don't like death. Until that day when there was no such person in the city of Wei. Those people were all dead. I thought you were also dead. Later, when the Empress also jumped down from here, I realized that death is not terrible." Sang Sang did not turn around. Her knuckles behind her turned white. She must be exerting a little force. She looked at the distant shore and thought to herself, "Do you want me to die so much?" She had asked this question many times. Ning Ke laughed again, and his body trembled. He said loudly, I said in West Hill that we will die together or live together. Sang Sang ignored him, and the big ship continued to move toward the shore. Yes, it's so unforgettable. How can I bear to let you die? You are Haotian, and you can calculate everything in the world. How can you not calculate this? You know I can't bear to let you die. Ning Ke pulled out the iron cutlass and put his hand into his chest. He held his heart and pulled it out forcefully. Blood flowed out, and his heart was exposed to the clear blue sky. His face was as pale as snow, and his body kept trembling. He could no longer stand and knelt down in his own blood. Blood splashed in front of his knees. Unforgettable? I crushed my heart. No matter how deep the words engraved on it are, can they still exist? I can't bear to let you die, so I crushed my heart. Naturally, my heart can bear it. Ning Ke gasped painfully and said, If you don't stop, then we will die together. Sang Sang still ignored him, and the big ship continued to move forward. She was now Haotian, a pure collection of objective rules. Naturally, she was indifferent and heartless. She was no longer bound by the human world, and would not be threatened. If Ning Ke committed suicide, Sang Sang would die, but Haotian would still be alive. A desperate expression appeared on his face, and at the same time there was a trace of ruthlessness. He clenched his fist. In the palm of his hand was the bright red, beating heart. His great spirit was close to the advanced level, and his body was as hard as iron. Most importantly, Sang Sang could heal his bones with a wave of her sleeve, so it was very difficult for him to commit suicide. During the time he traveled with Sang Sang in the human world, he had imagined many ways to commit suicide. Previously, he used the Great Spirit to cut open his chest and stabbed his heart. Once again, he confirmed that even if the blade pierced his heart, it would be difficult for him to die instantly. As long as Sang Sang had a moment, she could cure him. Therefore, he took out the heart. As long as he clenched his fist, it could be crushed into countless pieces. Even Haotian could not bring him back to life. If he died, Sang Sang would die, but Haotian would still be alive. It seemed unreasonable for him to do so, but he still decided to do so, because it represented his attitude, and he wanted to see her attitude in the end. He clenched his fist. With his current strength, even an iron ball would be crushed. However, the bright red heart was only a little deformed, not even a crack appeared. It was very painful. Ning Ke's heart was very painful, but it was not broken. He was shocked and confused, and did not understand why. Sang Sang stood at the bow of the ship, smiling without saying a word. In the last decades in the world of the chessboard, from the redwood forest to the peak of that mountain, she had left her divine body and lived in his heart. His heart had become extremely strong. Ning Ke himself did not know this change, but she did. She knew what he was thinking, so how could he beat her? A cool breeze blew past, and a light spring rain fell from the sky. The rain fell on Ning Ke's body, washing away the blood and the dust on his heart. The heart returned from his palm to his chest, and the wound healed instantly, not even a scar could be seen. Ning Ke looked at his chest, and felt that the heart seemed to beat more strongly than before. He could raise the iron cutlass, cut his chest again, and dig out the heart, but he did not do so. No matter how strong-willed a person was, it was difficult for him to kill himself a second time without hesitation when he failed to commit suicide. More importantly, he knew that Sang Sang would not give him a second chance. The previous time was an unspoken agreement between them, or a gamble. He lost. There was a sweetness in his heart, but he was not reconciled to it. Ning Ke said, I don't want to leave you. As I said, we will meet again when you can really write that character. Sang Sang looked at him quietly, and her face was a little pale. Her emotions were a little complicated, and she said, Besides, you have drunk my tea many times. For so many years, they lived under the same roof, tossed and turned in the same big bed, and ate in the same iron pot. Of course he had drunk her tea. Ning Ke was stunned, and after a long silence, he suddenly pointed between his legs. He asked loudly, "What should I do if you just leave like this?" Sang Sang smiled and said nothing. Ning Ke flew into a rage and shouted, "Hurry up and come down. Cure my legs." Sang Sang smiled and turned around, and did not speak again. She had fused with him, and now his heart had become indestructible, and the injury between his legs had naturally healed. Ning Ke, of course, knew that he just wanted to find an excuse to keep her. This excuse was a little ridiculous and pitiful. The big ship continued to sail to the horizon, and then gradually disappeared in the golden line. She was about to reach her other side. Looking at the gradually disappearing big ship, and looking at her who was far away, Ning Ke's tears kept flowing down his face, and he said bitterly, "You have already left. What's the use of this?" The big ship left, and countless believers in the human world knelt down to send them off. That golden line was the other side. Countless lights rushed in front of her, and Sang Sang subconsciously narrowed her eyes. The door of the divine kingdom was destroyed by the headmaster, and it was the first time for her to go back through this way. It was a little strange, but she knew it would not go wrong. Because she came from the divine kingdom, and her other side was naturally the divine kingdom. She closed her eyes, and was ready to meet herself in the divine kingdom, and then fuse with it. When she opened her eyes, she saw a lush mountain ridge. Her face was a little pale, and her body was a little stiff. She was very familiar with this lush mountain, but it was not the divine kingdom, but Min Mountain. In the mountain, she stood in silence for countless days and nights, trying to figure out the reason. The little indigo lion knelt beside her uneasily, and looked around. After countless days and nights, she finally figured out the reason. She was the choice of human beings, and she came from the human world, not the divine kingdom, so her other side was the human world. She was still in the human world. Besides, there was another reason. She looked at her lower abdomen and frowned slightly. She felt strange and even a little scared. Or, this was the real stroke of genius. End of Volume 5, Stroke of Genius. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1003. How are you? I'm not very well. The last chapter of The Vermilion Bird is also called The Other Shore. I have something to report to everyone. Ning Ke's last sentence might be vulgar to some of my friends, but I had never thought of changing or deleting it. I didn't explain the plot before many of my friends gave their opinions and suggestions, just for that sentence. I had thought of it when I was in the middle of the book. This was what I thought was a stroke of genius, and I liked it very much. If Ning Ke had said in that kind of mood, "A hero has no place to show his prowess," then he would have been too weak. That was not something a couple should say. I miss my wife very much. She left Yichang yesterday and is now in the northeast. At the end of last month, she knew that my father was not in good health and was going to have an operation. She worked very hard and finished writing 200,000 words. The operation was also arranged. I returned to Hubei on the 4th of this month. My father's heart bypass surgery was very successful, and my family was naturally working hard. I also persisted in updating my work. Everything is going well, and I even saved 3 chapters. My wife returned to the northeast yesterday. Because she had to work, I sent her to the airport. After returning home, I felt a little dizzy, so I measured my blood pressure and went to the health station downstairs. The doctor asked me to go to the hospital, and the doctor asked me to stay in the hospital. Then I was hospitalized, and it was quite serious. Today, the situation is much better, and these 3 chapters were updated in the hospital. My friends don't need to call me. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry that I didn't take good care of my body, and my family still needs to take care of me. I feel very guilty, and I definitely can't write 200,000 words this month. Everyone has worked hard these past few days, and under such circumstances, I dropped the ball at such a crucial moment. I still feel very guilty, and I feel a little unwilling. I think our family is very happy, and these annoying things should not have happened. Alright, I will definitely get through this smoothly. Health is the most important thing, and if everything goes well, I will try to get out of the hospital in 5 or 6 days. I will write when I can, and apologize to everyone and my family again. I still miss my wife very much, especially at such a time. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Clipchamp to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1004. I was discharged today. Firstly, I want to thank everyone. Secondly, I want to apologize to my family and everyone. I can't blame the heavens or anyone else for my health problems. It's my own problem. These few days I've been thinking a lot in the hospital and had many feelings. When I'm at peace, I'll talk to everyone again. Now I just want to apologize. I didn't reply to everyone's messages because I don't know what to reply. These few days my family is really in a mess. Until now, my heart is still in a mess. I want to tell everyone that I'm safe and I'll slowly return to work tomorrow. Thank you again. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Clipchamp to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 1005. I kept trying during the day and realized that it was not working. My head is a little dizzy and I can't handle writing. I'm also very anxious, but this illness cannot be rushed. There's no other way. Sorry. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Clipchamp to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1006. It was late spring in the city of Lincoln. Guest houses were green. A sedan came from outside the city and moved slowly on the street. Lu Yiqing sat in the sedan with his eyes closed, looking calm. During the spring sacrifice, countless lanterns were raised in the city and drifted to the night sky. Numerous Taoist believers knelt before the lanterns and prayed to Haotian. It was a solemn and sacred scene. Lu Yiqing could not see anything, nor could he see the spring night or the thousands of lanterns. But he could hear the prayers and feel the fanaticism of the believers. Naturally, he thought of the spring wind and rain a few days ago, the sweet rain that sprinkled on the human world, those magical scenes, and the big ship that sailed to the divine kingdom. Haotian had left the human world, but her grace remained. The changes caused by this would change the world and the era profoundly. Lu Yiqing raised his hand tiredly. The sedan turned into a side street and walked slowly on the road that had been widened over the years. Finally, they came to an old house. The old house was not as shabby as it used to be. It had been painted by the devout believers of the new stream. Lu Yiqing got off the sedan and walked into the house. He stood by the window and kept silent for a long time. Chen Pippi walked to him and looked at the starry sky outside the window. Lu Yiqing said, "I can see that the great era is coming." His eyes were covered with a white cloth, so he could not see anything. But he could see the magnificent future, the human world, and the blood and killing. The new stream that had been spreading rapidly in the past few years had almost been wiped out in just a dozen days. It was not only because the divine halls of Westhill had announced that the new stream would be banned and the believers would be burned by fire when they were alive and thrown into the abyss after death. They would never be able to enter the divine kingdom of Haotian. It was also because Haotian had shown her kindness and power to the human world. For the doctrine of the new stream, the blessings left by Haotian in the human world, the devout believers who suddenly recovered, the cultivators who broke through the realm, and the new fingers were the heaviest blows. Chen Pippi looked at the dim moon in the starry sky and said after a long time of silence, "Other than waiting, maybe we can do something else, such as fighting." Lu Yiqing looked at the starry sky and said, "Humans can't fight against heaven." Chen Pippi said, "This doesn't sound like something you would say." A few years ago, during the Right to Light on the Peach Mountain, Lu Bai charged into the divine hall of light with his sword. The disciples of the sword Garrett did not hesitate to protect Chen Pippi and Tang Xiaotang from the encirclement of the Peach Mountain and returned to Lincoln. From that day on, the sword Garrett stood on the opposite side of Taoism. The decisiveness and valiance that Lu Yiqing displayed in his choice still shocked the cultivation world several years later. The starlight fell on the white cloth covering Lu Yiqing's eyes. It was as if a layer of frost had been plated on it. It looked like 10,000 years of snow, cold and firm. His voice was the same. Just because I can't fight against the heavens doesn't mean I won't fight. Chen Pippi remained silent. Lu Yiqing's words were the attitude of the sword pavilion. It was as cold and hard as the edge of a sword. However, there were still many helpless sighs that had not been spoken. This kind of resolution could not change the situation of the human world, so it was only tragic and stirring. The rescript from the West Hill Divine Palace should arrive soon. Lu Yiqing said. He had not seen the rescript yet, but he could guess that it was asking the South Jin Kingdom to ban the new stream and hand over Chen Pippi and the others. He turned his eyes away from the starry night and looked at Chen Pippi through the thin white cloth. He said calmly, "The sword Garrett has no more power to protect you. Get ready to leave." Chen Pippi sighed and said, "I'm used to living in Lincoln. It's a bit messy to leave." Lu Yiqing did not say anything. He turned around and walked out. The South Jin Kingdom was powerful, second only to the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Being an ally of the Tang Empire was very important to the balance of the war. However, the sword Garrett could not completely cut off the influence of Taoism on the South Jin Kingdom. As Haotian sprinkled rain on the human world, the people of the South Jin Kingdom became more and more convinced of Haotian. Undercurrents were surging in Lincoln. Both the imperial palace and the military were preparing. No matter how powerful the sword Garrett was, they could no longer turn the tide. Unless the academy intervened, or the Tang army left the verdant canyon in advance, broke through the Qing River and crossed the Great Swamp to take control of the South Jin Kingdom before the divine halls of West Hill did. However, in the past few years, although the Tang Empire's national strength had been recovering, the real strength of the Iron Cavalry had become much weaker due to the ceding of the Xiangwan Plain. Most importantly, the Tang Empire's current peak combat power was seriously insufficient. Even with the addition of the sword Garrett, it was impossible for them to be a match for the Dao sect. Many powerhouses of Haotian Taoism perished in the war a few years ago. But Haotian Taoism ruled the world after all and had unlimited potential. With the return of the South Sea, especially after the rain, countless new powerhouses emerged in countless Taoist temples. The drunkard and the butcher were still in hiding, which deterred the top few in the academy. So who could deal with these new powerhouses of Haotian Taoism? In the end, it was all because of the spring wind and rain. That rain had greatly changed the face of the cultivation world. Countless cultivators had crossed the high threshold in front of them. Many of them had entered the insight realm overnight. The number of cultivators in the knowing destiny state had also increased a lot. It could be said that powerhouses were emerging in large numbers. Perhaps this was the proof of the arrival of the so-called Great Era. The Revelation Institute was preparing for the grand competition in early summer. Lu Qingjiao, who had become the vice-headmaster, looked at the nervous students and recalled the past. She was confused. It was in the grand competition held by the Revelation Institute that Long Qing stood out. Would there be a similar story this year? In a remote corner, the little Taoist looked at the neat pile of firewood. After a long silence, he put the hatchet on his waist and walked toward the crowd. He looked at the instructor and said nervously, "I want to sign up." The instructor looked at the dusty little Taoist and said sternly, "Do you know what you are doing?" Lu Qingjiao looked at the little Taoist quietly and suddenly asked, "What's your name?" The little Taoist was a bit flustered by her beautiful face. He said, "Hengmu Liren." Lu Qingjiao asked, "Why do you want to sign up?" The little Taoist was nervous and said, "I want to participate in the grand competition." Lu Chenjiao was silent for a while and asked, "What state are you in now?" The little Taoist shook his head and said, "I don't know. There was a lake in the Revelation Institute. Everyone was at the lakeside." The little priest looked into the lake and saw that some fish had suddenly stopped moving. Lu Chenjia's face turned pale when she saw this. The instructor even fainted. "I don't know what happened to you, but it must be a miracle." Lu Chenjia looked at the little Taoist and said with a trembling voice, "Because you are a gift from Haotian to the human world. Even though it's not much, it's finally starting. I feel relieved. Even if it's a long journey of 10,000 miles, I can still finish the first step. Thank you again." This is the last volume of Jiang Yi. It's called, All of a Sudden, I Thought About Using the Beginning of All Things and Before the Sky Turns Dark to report to you that I will take good care of my body, write seriously, cherish every day, and strive to live to a ripe old age. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 1007. In the spring grand competition of the West Hill Divine Palace, a nameless little Taoist boy from the woodshed of the Revelation Institute won first place and displayed an unimaginable state. In the distant grassland, a young slave who collected cow dung for a living won the contest. He was freed from slavery by Chanyu of the Golden Tribe and became a glorious warrior. In the grassland contest, 2 young attendants were taken as core disciples by the national master. The Golden Tribe had 13 priests with profound states, and the national master seemed to have become more powerful. Similar things happened all over the world. A middle-aged priest in the Taoist temple of the kingdom of Song entered the knowing destiny state by the well. Similar things happened in many other Taoist temples. The plain Taoist temple deep in the mountains of the divine halls of West Hill was quiet as usual. The Jishou Abbey had been deserted for several years since the abbey dean left. The withered leaves piled up on the stone steps and became thin and brittle due to the wind. The door of the temple opened by itself. The tactical array in the temple was still running. No one could get in except for the wind. The breeze blew over the lake and blew the golden and white straws under the eave. It seeped in through the window and lingered on the beams and walls. Finally, it came to the table in front of the window and opened the big book like a pair of invisible hands. The breeze was illiterate, but it still flipped the book randomly. The book was flipped and the white paper kept falling down. The ink characters on it became blurred lines. The breeze slowed down and the characters became clearer. The hand-scroll that recorded the names of the most powerful cultivators in the world of cultivation had fewer names compared to a few years ago, such as Lu Bai, Yi Su, and Chen Pipi, but there were more names. Some of the new names were unfamiliar, such as Hungmu Liren. Haotian was fair. She gave her followers all kinds of benefits in the spring breeze and rain. She did not forget to give immortality to some people in Chang'an. But at the same time, she was not fair either. That was because the divine halls of West Hill was cool while Chang'an was hot in the summer. It had not rained for several days in the late summer. The streets of Chang'an were scorched by the scorching sun. The water in the well at the entrance of the alley was clear and cool, but the steam coming out from the well was intimidating. The dry world was filled with the smell of smoke and fire. It seemed that the city would be set ablaze with a single spark. The situation in Chang'an was the same. The seemingly peaceful atmosphere was actually filled with endless pressure and impatience. The empire had started to prepare for the upcoming war. The officials and scribes in the government were running around to deliver documents. The transportation of food and fodder had entered the most important stage. The military was on standby. Countless military orders were sent from the city to the counties and the front line. To the north of the Vermilion Bird Avenue, past the Jianshan Archway, there was a large forest. Behind the forest was a green meadow. There were dozens of buildings with bright tiles and black eaves. This was the military headquarters. The centermost pavilion was the main government office of the military ministry. Several deacons and officers stood solemnly at the stone steps outside the building. They were all drenched in sweat. But no one knew whether it was because of the suffocating heat wave or because of the suffocating tension represented by the voices behind them. The focus of the war is definitely the South Gene. If we can get out of the verdant canyon in half a month and open up Qinghe Prefecture, we can help the Sword Garret stabilize the South Gene. The speaker was Xu Qing. He had been transferred back to Chang several years ago to take charge of the overall defense of the Tang army. He was no longer the commanding general of the West. General Su Qi stayed in the northern battlefront camp to face the powerful Golden Tribe royal court. Now that he was the head of the military ministry, his opinion was naturally important. It was very quiet in the pavilion. Several generals and more than a dozen staff officers remained silent. They did not agree or disagree with what Xu Qing said. Everyone knew that if they could ally with the South Jin, the Tang Empire would be invincible. But this was impossible. First of all, the Tang army was not sure that they could open up Qinghe Prefecture in half a month. Even if they could not rebuild the navy in such a short time. How could they cross the Great Swamp? The most important problem was that the Tang Empire and the South Jin Kingdom had been enemies for many years. Although the Sword Garret was now on the opposite side of Taoism, the royal family of the South Jin Kingdom, the army, and the ordinary people would not choose to ally with the Tang Empire. I thought the final battle would still be in the north. A general gave his opinion. In the war against the Tang Empire several years ago, the Golden Tribe royal court was the biggest threat to the Tang Empire and the biggest benefit after the war. There was no doubt that the wolf cavalry on the grassland was the most powerful enemy of the Tang army. They were also the enemy that the Tang army wanted to defeat the most. When two armies fought, the most important thing was the momentum. If the enemy's strongest force could be defeated, many difficulties would be solved. The Tang army chose the Golden Palace as their opponent, which was not a mistake. However, the problem was that the northern battlefront army was severely short of warhorses because of the cession of the Xiangwan Plain. The northern battlefront army alone was far from enough to defeat the Golden Palace, let alone drive them out of the 7 stockade villages. When we signed the agreement with the Divine Halls of Westhill, the Academy promised the Imperial Court that even if we ceded the Xiangwan Plain, there would be no problem. So I think there should be no problem. General Su Qi also expressed the same idea in his letter. What we need to do is to cooperate with the Academy. General Xu Qing looked a little tired. He said, "The problem is, if we choose to fight the Golden Tribe from the beginning, even if we can gather the power of the whole country to win, what about the other directions? Once the Divine Halls of Westhill regains control of the South Jin Kingdom, how can we take back Qinghe Prefecture? Qinghe County had to be taken back, because every day that the warlords existed in this world was another day of humiliation for the Tang Empire. The Golden Tribe royal court had to be massacred because there were countless souls of the Tang army waiting to be redeemed by their comrades at the frontier fortress. The Yen Kingdom had to be conquered because it represented betrayal and unbearable slaughter. Correspondingly, the Tang Empire was surrounded by danger. The temporary peace of the Yueluan Kingdom did not mean anything. Far away in the West Wilderness, the barbarians whom the Tang army had never fought had begun to gather their cavalry. Maybe in a few months, they would join the Golden Tribe royal court's army to invade the south. Similarly, the Yen Kingdom was recovering under the rule of Emperor Chongming and with the help of the Divine Halls of Westhill. With the help of the cavalry of the East Wilderness, the Yen Kingdom would not be as weak as it used to be. It was even more so for the Qinghe Prefecture and the South Jin Kingdom in the south. In this world, the enemies of the Tang Empire were everywhere, so there was no peaceful border. In this world, the enemies that the Tang had to defeat were everywhere, so there was no main direction to attack. Did the disciples of the Sword Garret go to the Great River Kingdom for shelter last time? Xu Qing asked. The current situation was clear. If the divine halls of West Hill went north, the South Jin Kingdom would not be able to protect them. In the eyes of the Tangs, the disciples of the sword Garrett had helped them before. So they had the obligation to protect them. At this moment, there was a military report from the South Jin Kingdom outside the building. The sword Garrett told the Tangs that they were not willing to retreat and were determined to defend Lincoln. Why were they not willing to retreat? Lu Yiqing's answer in the letter was simple: because they were not willing. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1008. My sister is also hospitalized today. She's the third one this month. There's nothing much to say. It's been a tough year for my family. I'll stop writing for a while. Please give me your blessings. I think everything will get better soon. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1009. All kinds of medicine, all kinds of troubles, all kinds of indescribable, all kinds of discomfort. I suspect that I have a hysteria. When I return to the Qin Kingdom the day after tomorrow, I will go to the hospital to have a good examination. I hope I can solve both my physical and mental problems and report to everyone. Chapter 1010. Taking medicine, walking, exercising, going to bed early and waking up early, all kinds of checkups, living the life of a retired old man for a month. The details of the report will be left for the end of the year. I will do a follow-up around the 15th. The results should be out after the holiday. If there are no problems, I will start working. I bow to you and wish you good health. Chapter 1011. It was hot in Lincoln in midsummer. A chariot was moving slowly on the street outside the city gate. Lu Yiqing was sitting in the chariot with his eyes closed, looking indifferent. Sparks were shining everywhere in the city, lighting up the dark night sky. It was a beautiful scene. Lu Yiqing couldn't see anything, so he couldn't see the sparks. But he could feel the heat and hear the curses and screams. It was not the spring rain when Haotian left the human world, nor the golden flowers falling to the ground, nor the thousands of lights during the spring sacrifice. Someone was setting fires and killing people. The city in the night was like a dark sea. Thousands of dazzling flames were floating on the surface. Lincoln did not fall, but it had fallen. The devout followers of Haotian smashed the houses of the followers of the new stream and kept killing. In the past few months, many followers of the new stream had left Lincoln with their families. The fanatical followers had nowhere to vent their anger, so it was natural for them to set the houses left by the sinners on fire. People were dying and screams were everywhere. The killers and victims were all from the South Jin Kingdom. But in the name of faith, who would remember these things? Lu Yiqing was still expressionless. He sat in the chariot with his eyes closed, as if he was about to fall asleep. Maybe it was because the chariot was shaking like a bed. The chariot was carried by 4 ordinary servants, not disciples of the sword Garrett. There was no disciple of the sword Garrett around the chariot. All the disciples of the sword Garrett were not in Lincoln or the sword Garrett, but on the road. All the disciples of the sword Garrett followed Chin Pippi and moved to the north with thousands of followers of the new stream. According to the original plan, they should be close to the border of Song and the Tang Empire. Tonight, Lu Yiqing was alone. Even though he was a powerful cultivator of the knowing destiny state, he could not change the fate of the city. He was going to meet his own destiny. The screams and sounds of fighting were gradually left behind by the chariot. The closer they got to the imperial city, the quieter it was. No followers came to make trouble, and no houses were set on fire. The streets were dark. On both sides of the dark street, there were sounds of rapid breathing. Occasionally, there were sounds of weapons and armors clashing. These sounds were full of danger. Lu Yiqing naturally heard it clearly, but he did not do anything. There was no vigilant expression on his face either. He knew that those who could be heard by him would definitely not dare to attack him. Yes, the South Gene Kingdom was known as the second most powerful country in the world. It had a strong military, but no one dared to attack it. The sedan traveled from the west of the city to the front of the imperial city, and no soldiers dared to move. Because he was the younger brother of the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai. He was the current master of the sword Garrett. He had once entered the palace alone and killed the emperor of the South Gene Kingdom. All these years, he was the last spirit and boldness of the South Gene Kingdom. The imperial city was shrouded in the darkness of the night. There was not a single light. It was incomparably dark and deathly silent. The carriage stopped. Lu Yiqing slowly raised his head and looked at the tightly shut city gates. He had long since become blind, but his gaze seemed to pierce through the white cloth in front of him, wanting to cut open the city gates. His right hand left his knee and landed on the hilt of his sword. The four people carrying the chariot fled into the night with faces full of fear and unease. Lu Yiqing was very clear that the real danger, or perhaps his final fate, was in this quiet imperial city. The spring breeze and rain several months ago, and the big ship that sailed towards the Divine Kingdom, had completely changed the situation in the world. The divine halls of West Hill issued an edict, and the whole world began to exterminate the new stream. The South Gene Kingdom, from the royal family to the military to the ordinary people, had completely sided with the divine halls of West Hill. No one had the power to reverse the situation. If Liu Bai was still alive, he might be able to, given his supreme prestige and unimaginable strength in the South Gene Kingdom. But Liu Bai was already dead. He was only Liu Bai's younger brother. Facing this raging tide, he only had two choices: to leave or to die. He chose to stay, which meant that he chose to die. The heavy city gates opened silently. Hundreds of armored cavalrymen of the South Gene Kingdom galloped out of the imperial city. Their iron spears were like a forest, and the cold light was threatening. Hundreds of torches suddenly stopped on the imperial city, as if hundreds of fire arrows had been shot at the sail of a ship in the night. The dark night sky was instantly lit up, and it was as bright as day, even a little dazzling. The emperor of the South Gene Kingdom came to the top of the city wall under the protection of dozens of powerhouses. He looked at Lu Yiqing and shouted, "Damned blind man, you will die tonight." The current emperor of the South Gene Kingdom was very young. Back when Lu Yiqing killed the former emperor, he chose the youngest son of the deceased to succeed the throne, thinking that he would not be so troublesome because of his young age. Now years had passed, and the little emperor was still a little emperor. But obviously, he had become very troublesome now. The fear and anger of the royal family of the South Gene Kingdom towards the sword Garrett were all reflected in his words. The little emperor's face was very pale because he was very afraid of the blind man in front of the imperial city. His pale cheeks were abnormally red, because he thought that the blind man was about to die, so he was very excited. His voice was trembling because he was both afraid and excited. The light from hundreds of torches made him squint his eyes, and he seemed to be intoxicated. Lu Yiqing did not squint his eyes to show his disdain or contempt, because he was blind. He did not show any other emotions on his face, because real disdain could not be seen. "You can't kill me," Lu Yiqing said calmly, because he was stating the truth. Neither the hundreds of cavalrymen that poured out of the palace gate, nor the dozens of cultivators who served the emperor on the city wall could kill him. If he could be killed like this, how could the emperor of the South Gene Kingdom be killed by him? The little emperor's face turned very ugly. He knew very well that no one could save Lu Yiqing tonight, but he could not refute Lu Yiqing's words, because the person who could kill Lu Yiqing was not his man. The ground in front of the imperial city trembled slightly. It came from afar, and then there was a slight explosion in the air, followed by the thundering sound of horse hooves. Lu Yiqing knew that 2,000 papal cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill had arrived. The imperial city that was as bright as day suddenly dimmed. Dozens of divine priests of the divine halls of West Hill appeared with a very thin middle-aged Taoist walking in front. The middle-aged Taoist's name was Zhao Sisho, and he was the priest of the Revelation Department of the Divine Halls of West Hill. He also had a more important identity, the second son of the great divine priest of the South Sea, Zhao Nanhai. Lu Yiqing did not look at Zhao Sisho, but looked into the deep dark night. Zhao Sisho was a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state of the South Sea, but Lu Yiqing did not pay attention to him, only the dark night. He did not know who was in the dark night. Lu Yiqing looked at the dark night and asked, "Is the Divine Hall going to directly intervene in the affairs of the world?" A voice came from the dark night. This was originally started by you. Lu Yiqing thought about it and agreed with this statement. He was the first to lift a corner of the curtain of the new era. Tonight, let him completely lift this curtain. After 2 months, I'm finally back. Thank you all for your concern and greetings. I haven't reported the specific problems because it's a private matter after all. I'll just take a leave of absence. I don't think it's appropriate to say too much and cause everyone to be annoyed. I've said before that we'll find time to have a good chat at the end of the year. Let's wait. There are indeed a lot of feelings. This is the first time in my life that I've been hospitalized. Now that all the details of my life have changed, I've bid farewell to many of my hobbies. In terms of work, I will start slowly. It will be slower, and I may not have updates every day. After I get used to it, I will adjust. Also, today's chapter did not use the names of the previous 2 chapters because I wanted to have a good start. I wish everyone the best. Please exercise more. A diet low in sugar, fat, and salt is very important. Really, it's more important than anything else. Swimming is the best. Chapter 10-12. The human world 1,000 years ago was very different from what it was now. At that time, it was very chaotic and there were very few people. Only those who could cultivate were qualified to live like humans. Those who could not were like dogs. As for the divine halls of West Hill, it was the divine kingdom on earth, a heaven that had nothing to do with the mortal world. It was not until the headmaster established the Tang Empire and taught the world that the situation changed. The divine halls of West Hill were forced to look at the mortal world. Cultivators could no longer enslave mortals like before, and the cultivation world could no longer be as superior as before. As a result, there were more and more people in the human world. That was the reason why there was a sage every 1,000 years. After the headmaster left the human world, many things changed again. No one could stop the cultivators from ruling the world again, at least outside of Chang'an. A few years ago, Lu Yiqing entered the palace alone and killed the emperor of the South Jin Kingdom. That was the proof of this change. A new era had come, and he was the first one to lift the curtain. The human world had lost its protector, and the rules began to collapse. The new era would become primitive and bloody again, and everyone would have the chance to use their own power to speak their own truth. The powerful were the masters of this new world. Lu Yiqing was a powerful cultivator, and the enemies he faced tonight were also powerful cultivators who had the right to speak. He only hoped that it would be faster. So he did not look at Zhao Sisho. Although the skinny priest was a powerful cultivator in the knowing destiny state from the South Sea and was the son of Zhao Nanhai, he was not a real match for him. Lu Yiqing looked at the night and said, "Then, come on." The night was as quiet as water. The voice did not sound and no one came out. Zhao Sisho's face was a bit pale, and his wrinkles were full of unwillingness. But he did not make a move, because he heard footsteps coming from the imperial city. Everyone around the imperial city heard the footstep. The footsteps were steady and rhythmic. The shoes on the feet were not made of leather, but cotton. The sound was a bit dull, like the sound of wood breaking. A young man walked out of the imperial city. The light from the fire made the ground as bright as day, and also made the shadow of the youth abnormally clear, but it was impossible to see his face clearly, only that he was wearing an old green robe, the edge of the green robe embroidered with brand new golden thread. In the West Hill Divine Palace, only red-robed priests were qualified to embroider with golden thread. What was puzzling was that the lad was not wearing a red robe. His green robe had been washed so many times that it had turned white. He looked like a manservant. It was probably because he was used to being a servant. Lu Yiqing tilted his head and quietly listened to the footstep. His grip on the hilt of his sword loosened and tightened at times. There seemed to be some sort of rhythm that matched the footsteps, or perhaps they were fighting. As he walked, the sound of metal rubbing against each other could be heard behind him. 13 slender sabers slowly emerged from their scabbards and appeared in everyone's line of sight. The knives were like flower petals, and he stood in the middle of them. He stopped and raised his head to look at the night sky. Because of this action, the firelight illuminated his cheeks. His ordinary eyebrows and eyes were clearly illuminated, and his face was somewhat pale. Similarly pale, the young emperor of the South Jin Kingdom on the city wall looked pale and timid, but there was a kind of fearful madness in his pale face. Other than the flower formed by the sabers behind him, he was holding a big golden flower in his hand. He looked at the golden flower with a devout and fanatical expression, as if there was an extremely hot flame in his eyes. He reached out to pluck the flower petals and murmured, "Die, don't die, die, don't die." After plucking a petal, he said, "Die." After plucking another petal, he said, "Don't die." After the last petal left the stem and fell to the ground, he said, "Die." The lad was happy, as naive as a child. His cheeks became even paler. He looked at Lu Yiqing on the sedan and said in a trembling voice, "You're going to die tonight." His voice was trembling because he was nervous. He had never really fought before, but he was not afraid, because he knew that he would never lose in Haotian's world. Lu Yiqing did not say anything. He knew clearly that no matter how the lad counted, he would die in the end. Even though he could not see, he knew who the lad was. People around the imperial city also knew who the lad was, including the young emperor of the South Jin Kingdom. They were all excited, but remained silent out of awe. In the late spring, in the grand competition of the Divine Halls of Westhill, a manservant in indigo won the first place. He did not have a master. A few months ago, he could not even cultivate, but a spring rain made him enter the knowing destiny state. No one, including the hierarch of the Divine Halls of Westhill, knew the limit of his potential or his actual state. His appearance was like a miracle. In the eyes of the followers of Haotian, he was the real genius of Taoism. Neither Yi Su nor the rumored Chen Pippi could be compared with this lad, because he was the gift left by Haotian to the human world. His name was Hengmu Liren. He used to be a manservant in indigo who chopped firewood in the Revelation Institute. Now he was a red-robed divine priest of the Divine Halls of Westhill. Lu Yiqing asked, "How are you going to kill me?" Hengmu Liren said, "I will use a knife." Lu Yiqing asked, "What knife?" Hengmu Liren said, "A chopper." His 13 knives were all thin knives, suitable for killing but not for chopping firewood. But he insisted on calling them choppers. Maybe it was because he had been chopping firewood for many years or for some other reason. Lu Yiqing shook his head and said, "You are much weaker than him." The people around the imperial city maintained absolute silence, so the conversation between the two was clearly transmitted to everyone's ears, but no one could understand it. "You are much weaker than him? Who is he?" Hengmu Liren knew who Lu Yiqing was talking about. His eyes were burning and he shouted, "No one can defeat me. Not you, not him." Lu Yiqing touched the sheath beside him and said, "You are very proud." Hengmu Liren said, "Because I am confident." Lu Yiqing looked at him through the white cloth and said, "People of our generation never express their confidence with words or expressions. We are used to drawing our swords when we meet." Hengmu Liren did not look young because of his long years of hard work and exposure to wind and sun. But his expression was still innocent and his smile was cruel. "That man cut you into a blind man. Tonight I will cut you into a dead man. When I meet him in a few days, I will cut him into a blind man first. That is a wish for you. I have never had such a wish, Lu Yiqing said, because I know very well that no matter how hard I try, I can never be more powerful than him. Neither can you. Hengmu Liren said, you seem to have a lot of confidence in him. Lu Yiqing looked at him and said with pity, if you meet him, you will die. It is a simple truth. But you are too naive and arrogant to understand it. He looked into the night and said, that man must understand it. But obviously, he did not warn you. It seems that not many people in the divine halls like you. But after a long period of serious consideration, I've decided not to publish it for the time being. I'll use a year or two to revise it before publishing it. This matter has to be done sooner or later. It's better to do it earlier than later. My predecessors have already learned a painful lesson. Also, the China Writers Association is holding a youth conference in Beijing. After thinking about it, I think it's better for me to stay at home. After all, recuperation is the most important thing. Also, I'm not too sure. Is a 36-year-old considered a young writer? I'm just kidding. I'll participate again in the future. I'd like to express my gratitude here. Chapter 10:13. My body and energy can't keep up. I'm sure that I'll be very intermittent at the beginning of this period of time. It won't look good if I take a leave of absence from time to time. In the future, when I don't update, I won't write a single chapter. I'll report to everyone in the book review and comment section. I'll slowly adjust to my work and strive to return to normal as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. Chapter 10:14. Hengmu Liren did not understand Lu Yiqing's words. He did not understand why he would definitely die if he met that person. He also did not understand why Lu Yiqing said that the person in the darkness would understand. As a young lad who had just become a powerhouse of the divine halls from a servant of the Revelation Institute, there were many things he did not understand. But standing in the light before the imperial city and looking at Lu Yiqing on the sedan, he could clearly feel the excitement in his soul. He knew that Lu Yiqing would be the first powerhouse he would kill. Lu Yiqing looked around slowly. The white cloth on his face reflected the light from the top of the city wall and looked very white. He looked calm and did not feel surprised because of the silence around him. The divine priests of the divine halls of West Hill and the cultivators who were loyal to the royal family of the South Jin Kingdom were absolutely calm. The powerhouses including Zhao Sisho from the South Sea did not intend to attack Lu Yiqing, because they knew that the battle that was about to happen could only belong to Hengmu Liren. This was a demonstration of the divine halls of West Hill to the human world. It was a demonstration of the gift left by Haotian on the Peach Mountain and the indestructible eternal power of Taoism. Hengmu Liren walked to the front of the sedan and stopped. He took out a saber from his back. The saber was very thin and looked like the Xiu sword of the Great River Kingdom. He took out the saber in an ordinary way, as if he was going to find a piece of wood and cut it into halves. However, it was this simple movement that caused the tens of thousands of zhang of space between the night sky and the ground to change. The blade rubbed against the scabbard, giving off a light sound. The night clouds high up in the sky scattered like startled birds, revealing the crescent moon and several hundred faint stars. When he held the slender blade and pointed the blade at Lu Yiqing on the carriage, a fierce wind stirred in front of the imperial city and waves rose in the moat. The clouds dispersed and the night appeared. The wind blew and the water was chaotic. These were all natural phenomena. When these natural phenomena were related to human actions, it meant that the qi of heaven and earth was changing rapidly. The thin knife was unsheathed and the heaven and earth had such a strong reaction. How unfathomable was the state and psyche power of the young lad in indigo who was holding the knife. The people who were watching the scene were shocked by the change of the qi of heaven and earth. Even the divine priests from the divine halls of West Hill and Zhao Sisho were breathing heavily. They knew that Hengmu Liren was a highly valued genius of the divine halls, but none of them had seen him fight. It was not until now that they realized how powerful Hengmu was. The moonlight, the stars, and the light from the torches on the city wall fell on Hengmu Liren. His indigo robe was like the blue sky and the blade in his hand was like a burning match. Hengmu Liren's body seemed to be burning in the blue sky. The endless Hengmu Liren's divine light burst out from the blade. The crowd was even more astonished. The Haotian's Liren's action. Tian Ho Yin Yen was not Shin not the Isin. The Haotian's divine light was so pure and horrifying that even the great divine priest of judgment was not as powerful as him. It had nothing to do with talent, diligence, or power of understanding. It had everything to do with Haotian himself. He was the young lad favored by Haotian. He was Haotian's gift to the human world. Lu Yiqing could not see Hengmu Liren who was burning, but he could feel the scorching heat and the endless power contained in the Haotian's divine light. The white cloth on his face seemed like it was about to burn, but his expression was still calm. Tonight, the city of Linkhong was filled with sparks and sounds of hoofbeat. The divine halls of Westhill was invading. The royal family of South Jin cooperated closely with the military. The sword Garrett was gone and he was the only one left. This was the battle that the divine halls of Westhill wanted to see. Because Lu Yiqing was a truly powerful cultivator, and Hengmu Liren could only shock the world by defeating such a powerful cultivator. The crowd was nervous and curious. Hengmu Liren had demonstrated an unimaginable state. If his opponent was another powerful cultivator, he would definitely win. But his opponent was Lu Yiqing. The situation was different. It was not because Lu Yiqing was the current guardian of the sword Garrett. It seemed that he might be the last guardian. Nor was it because Lu Yiqing was the younger brother of the sage of sword Lu Bai. It was because, as the person in the darkness said, Lu Yiqing's name would be recorded in the history of the cultivation world. Knowing that one's name would be left behind after one's death was an incredible thing. It would allow the person who left behind his name to obtain true tranquility at the soul level. This kind of situation was undoubtedly the best opportunity for a cultivator to achieve a breakthrough. A few years ago, Lu Yiqing was already a great sword master in the knowing destiny state. What about now? Lu Yiqing's right hand was hanging by his side. His fingers were long and slender, perfect for holding a sword. His sword was right beside his hand. He could hold the hilt with just a thought. The crowd looked back and forth between Lu Yiqing's hand and the hilt nervously. Hengmu Liren did not pay attention to the crowd. His dark and slightly rough face showed no emotion. He looked at Lu Yiqing indifferently through the divine flame. In his opinion, Lu Yiqing was barely qualified to be his opponent. But if he had the choice, he would definitely not choose Lu Yiqing. After all, Lu Yiqing was not Lu Bai. The opponent that Hengmu wanted to challenge should still be in Chang'an. He was the opponent that the divine halls had arranged for him. More precisely, he was the opponent that the Abbey Dean had arranged for him. Therefore, even though he felt bored, he still came. Raise your sword and go to hell. With that, Hengmu Liren chopped at Lu Yiqing's head. His expression was very calm, as if he was doing something very ordinary. However, he himself did not notice that when he said those words, his voice was slightly trembling, because he was a little nervous and a little excited. His target was the person in Chang, and who also used a chopper. But how could he not be excited when he killed Lu Yiqing, a powerful swordsman a few months ago? Lu Yiqing sensed his emotion. He raised his head and looked at Hengmu Liren. He did not look at Hengmu Liren through the white cloth. Even though Hengmu was surrounded by the divine flame and looked extremely solemn and sacred, like a real god walking out from the murals in the divine halls, Lu Yiqing looked at the pale little emperor on top of the city wall. Hengmu Liren was also pale. Not because of fear, but because of anger. He did not understand why Lu Yiqing did not look at him even though he was blind. I am going to kill you. Why don't you look at me? I am excited and nervous because I am going to kill you. Why don't you look at me? I am the most powerful cultivator of the new generation in Taoism. Why don't you look at me? I am the divinity left by Haotian in the human world. How dare you not look at me? How dare you look down on me? Lu Yiqing held the hilt and stabbed forward. He still did not look at Hengmu Liren. He was still looking at the little emperor on the city wall. Because he did not stab Hengmu Liren, but the little emperor. Chapter 10:15. Hengmu Liren and his saber were both burning. The endless divine flame of Haotian burned all the qi of heaven and earth in the space into the tiniest dust. But he could not stop Lu Yiqing's sword. Because Lu Yiqing's sword pierced through the air. The sword's style tore the darkness apart and leaped over the holy white wall of fire. It was like a willow branch being blown by the wind and drifting over the surface of a lake. It did not even leave a ripple. Lu Yiqing looked at the little emperor on the city wall expressionlessly. Wherever his gaze landed, the sword would land. The little emperor could not see the sword, but he could see Lu Yiqing's gaze. His face turned paler and paler. He could no longer hold his breath and panted nervously. He felt that his lungs were going to explode in the next moment. His heart beat faster and faster as if it would explode at any moment. He covered his chest and started to vomit blood in pain. Hengmu Liren's saber made a sizzling sound in the air. It was the sound of burning air. In front of the light, Lu Yiqing's right hand, which was holding the hilt of the sword, was cut off at the wrist. Blood gushed out from Lu Yiqing's wrist. The sword and hand fell back onto the sedan. It must be extremely painful. But he did not show any emotion on his face. He was as calm as a silent willow. He could not see anything. His eyes were covered with a white cloth. But he still looked at the city wall quietly. His hand holding the sword was cut off and the sword fell to the ground. But the sword's style had already pierced through the air and arrived on the city wall. The city wall was made of bluestone. It looked dark in the darkness. Under the light of the fire, especially the divine flame of Haotian, it was not mottled at all. It looked like a black gem. Suddenly, countless fine cracks appeared on the surface of the black gem. Countless fine stone powder fell from the bluestone bricks on the city wall. The cracks spread in the blink of an eye. The imperial city was about to collapse. The people on the city wall did not know what was happening under their feet. The little emperor of the South Jin Kingdom was breathing faster and faster. His heart was beating faster and his face was getting paler. Finally, someone heard the cracking sound of the city wall and saw the horrifying cracks. They screamed in panic. The generals and the powerful cultivators helped the little emperor to escape from the city wall. But it was too late. The city wall was cracked, and so was the little emperor's heart. Countless fine cracks destroyed the weathered city wall and the little emperor's life. There was a panic on the city wall. People surrounded the little emperor, who was vomiting blood and falling to the ground. They were terrified to the extreme. Lu Yiqing sat in the carriage, quietly looking at the city wall, looking at the generals and experts he was once familiar with. The corners of his mouth slowly curled up, revealing a gratified smile. The thundering hoofbeats in the night and the arrival of Hengmu Liren and other powerful figures from the divine halls of West Hill had proved many things. Lu Yiqing was not surprised, but he was still a bit disappointed when it was proven. The Son of Heaven guarded the gates of the country. Tonight, the little emperor opened the gates of the South Jin Kingdom and welcomed in the cavalry of the West Hill Divine Palace. You are the emperor chosen by the sword Garrett for the South Jin Kingdom. Even if you are not required to guard the gates with your life, how can you open the gates yourself? From that moment on, the South Jin Kingdom changed color. The city walls of Lincoln were no longer of any use. So the walls of the imperial city, and the Tong and Men Gate all collapsed. Even though you are only 13 years old, even though you are the last direct descendant of the royal family of the South Jin Kingdom, even though you have called me your teacher for many years, and even though you are kind, you are still dead. Lu Yiqing thought so, and so he did. Therefore, he did not stab Hengmu Liren first, but the little emperor on the city wall. He wanted the last descendant of the royal family of the South Jin Kingdom to die with the city wall. For this, his right hand which was holding the sword was cut off. Hengmu Liren came to him. The holy Haotian divine flame shone on his face, making the white cloth on his face look like a piece of paper used to mourn the dead. He did not care at all. For the disciples of the sword Garrett, death and pain were the least of their concerns. What they needed to think about was how to inflict pain on their enemies. Hengmu Liren's blade was thin and sharp. The Haotian divine flame burning on the blade was even more terrifying. Lu Yiqing destroyed the city with his sword, so he could not resist anymore. With a boom, the southern city wall of the imperial city finally collapsed. Countless bricks and stones fell to the ground, shaking the earth. Dust rose up into the night sky. The collapsed city wall and the broken bricks were engraved with the history of the South Jin Kingdom. The dust was the dust of history, and it was filled with a sentimental smell. The dust darkened the entire world. Only the Haotian divine flame remained stable and showed no sign of dying out. On the contrary, the light was refracted by the particles in the dust and turned into a bright silver color. It looked even more holy and solemn, like the clouds under the stars. In the depths of the silver light, Hengmu Liren and Lu Yiqing faced each other in silence. 17 wounds appeared on Lu Yiqing's body. His right hand and 2 legs were separated from his body. The corner of his lips was also cut by the blade. It looked like he did not put on the rouge properly. There was a blade in front of his eyebrows. The blade intent pierced through the soul. The blade was thin and not heavy. Hengmu Liren held it firmly in his hand. All he needed to do was to push it forward and Lu Yiqing would die. Nobody could change that. Lu Yiqing slowly raised his left hand and wiped off the thick blood on the corner of his lip. He looked calm, as if there was no such a horrible blade in front of his eyebrows. On the contrary, Hengmu Liren looked pale and perplexed. His clear and determined eyes were filled with anger, confusion and humiliation. Why? He looked at Lu Yiqing and asked. Lu Yiqing looked at him through the white cloth and said nothing. Hengmu Liren knew that Lu Yiqing was blind. But somehow, he felt that Lu Yiqing's eyes were filled with mockery and sympathy. Why? He shouted harshly. Ever since the spring breeze and rain, Hengmu Liren had never doubted his power. He did not think that anyone in the human world could defeat him. But when he saw Lu Yiqing destroy a city with one sword, he had to admit that if Lu Yiqing used the same move on him, he would have a hard time dealing with it. But why? Why did Lu Yiqing not stab at him first? Was he not as important as the young emperor of South Jin in his eyes? Or was he so arrogant that he thought he could kill him with the second move? Lu Yiqing did not seem to feel the blade in front of his eyebrows. He said, "Because you don't deserve it." Hengmu Liren thought that was the funniest and most ridiculous sentence he had ever heard. Lu Yiqing said, "This is my first move. So even if you are an important figure in the divine halls of West Hill and the divine son of Taoism, you still don't deserve it." Hengmu Liren asked, "Why?" Lu Yiqing said, "The entire cultivation world is saying that you are a gift from Haotian to the human world." Hengmu Liren said, "Am I not worthy of your first move?" Lu Yiqing said, "My sword is used to kill, not to open gifts. Of course you don't deserve it." Chapter 10:16. Of course, I'm not asking for monthly votes or anything like that. I'm still going to report that I haven't updated today. In the past, I mentioned that my updates would be unstable and would often stop updating. I'll report this to everyone in the book review section, but after thinking about it for a long time today, I've decided to write a separate chapter to explain it to everyone. First, it's because of my body. I won't go into too much detail about this. There are some minor problems, or perhaps I should call it derivative problems, but based on my own analysis, this isn't actually important. As long as I don't do things blindly, it shouldn't affect my work too much, and there shouldn't be such obvious obstacles. Secondly, it's because of my own problems with Tsukuyomi. It's indeed rather difficult to start writing from scratch. The most difficult part is that my ability to tell a story will inevitably decrease. I keep feeling like there's something wrong with what I write and the plot I come up with, and I can't convince myself to lower my head and rush forward to write. How should I solve these two problems? I have good control over my schedule and my body, but how should I deal with the recovery of my writing ability? In the past, I didn't want to give myself any pressure, and I would seriously write whenever I felt like it. But after trying it for the past few days, I've discovered that it's useless. The combination of mental relaxation and physical discomfort will make it easy for me to give up. I think that, in the end, I still need to give myself a certain amount of pressure. I still need to give myself some mental restrictions, such as promises. Although with how shameless I am and how miserable I am this year, promises are basically no different from farts to me, the truth is that there's still some pressure. Starting tomorrow, I'll try my best to continuously update. It'll be best if each chapter has at least 3,000 words. I'll report to everyone. I can't guarantee the quality, but I think it'll definitely get better and better. I'll do my best to realize the great revival of Tsukuyomi as soon as possible, to the point where I can slap the table in praise and return to the beautiful kingdom of narcissism. I wish you a happy weekend and a happy National Day holiday. I'll happily write, and then I'll do my best to make your reading experience more and more enjoyable as soon as possible. Thank you. Chapter 10:17. It was a humiliation, a blatant humiliation. There were many kinds of humiliation. Verbal humiliation was the most common and the most powerless. For the experienced powerhouses, this kind of humiliation was useless. But it was not the case for Hungmu Liren. He had the power of a powerhouse, but he did not have the mentality of a powerhouse. That kind of mentality required a long time and countless battles to temper it. The so-called bright Taoist heart referred to this aspect. However, his fate had changed too strangely and suddenly. Because of a spring rain, he had become the most powerful young man in the West Hill Divine Palace from a handyman in the Revelation Institute. There was a very obvious gap in his cultivation. So when he heard what Lu Yiqing said, he became very angry. He was so angry that his hand holding the hilt began to tremble. The white cloth covering Lu Yiqing's eyes trembled in the night wind. He seemed to sense Hungmu Liren's trembling hand. He curled up the corner of his mouth and seemed to be sympathetic. Hungmu Liren said coldly, "Are you sympathizing with me?" Lu Yiqing shook his head and said, "I'm sympathizing with you." Hungmu Liren said, "What right do you have to sympathize with me?" Lu Yiqing said, "Of course I sympathize with you when you cannot get what you want." Hungmu Liren said, "Do you know what I want?" Lu Yiqing said, "No matter what you want tonight, you won't get it." Hungmu Liren kept silent for a while and suddenly calmed down. He knew clearly that the battle tonight was a test or training for him by the divine halls. He needed to learn how to be a truly powerful cultivator through the battle. Outwardly, they were capable of changing the world and turning the tide. Inwardly, they were calm and collected. Even if the Peach Mountain collapsed, they would not bat an eyelid. This was a true powerhouse. Only in this way could they go further. If Lu Yiqing wanted to make him angry, then he couldn't be angry, because anger would affect his judgment, and it would have a serious impact on the battle. However, tonight, Lu Yiqing had given up on the first strike. At this moment, he was covered in blood, and his limbs were broken. There was no way he could change the situation, so what was the point of making him angry? Hungmu Liren was satisfied. He was satisfied that he was no longer angry. He was satisfied that he could still think calmly during the battle. He looked at Lu Yiqing's pale face under the blade and thought sarcastically, "You may have other tricks up your sleeves, or you are seeking death. Either way, it's all in vain." From the very beginning, Lu Yiqing's response seemed to indicate that he wanted to die. Ever since he entered the knowing destiny state, Hengmu Liren had a completely different view on life and death. He knew that for many cultivators, death was not that scary, but living was more scary. Therefore, he would not allow Lu Yiqing to die. Perhaps it was because he was still very angry. As for the possibility that Lu Yiqing still had the strength to fight again, or the hidden skills, Hengmu Liren did not care at all. He was learning how to become a powerful cultivator, but his state of cultivation and confidence had already surpassed this level. He did not believe that anyone in the world of Haotian could defeat him. Sometimes, when he stood on the plateau and looked at the crippled old man in the wheelchair, he had the urge to push the wheelchair down, not to mention Lu Yiqing. "Come on, let's see what you're going to do." Hengmu Liren looked pale. The Haotian divine flame on his body kept burning. The thin blade in his hand was no longer trembling. The blade was no longer cold. It was glowing with warm or blazing light. It tore the night wind apart and stabbed toward the center of Lu Yiqing's eyebrows. Lu Yiqing sat cross-legged on the sedan. He did not dodge, because his legs were broken and blood was gushing out. And because he did not even think about dodging, he chose to strike with his sword. The broken hand and sword fell on the sedan. How could he strike with his sword? He used his left hand to hold the broken right hand on the sedan. Then, he struck. He struck with his sword. It was a strange scene, but to the people around the Imperial City it was a bit familiar. Years ago, someone did the same thing in front of the Verdant Canyon. That person was Jun Mo. He stabbed the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai. Lu Yiqing had also been in that field at that time. He had seen that sword and remembered it. The sword of the sword Garrett was the fastest in the world. Now it was imitating the sword style of Mr. Second of the Academy and using the sword style of the sword Garrett. The combination of the two made it unimaginably fast. There seemed to be a flash of lightning in the night. Lu Yiqing's sword arrived first even though it was launched later. Hengmu Liren's blade could only travel a hair's distance in the night breeze before his eyebrows. The sword in his right hand, which was held in his left hand, had already reached his chest. With a soft sound, the blade pierced into Hengmu Liren's chest. Half of the blade went into his chest. Blood was about to flow out. The onlookers around the Imperial City did not even have the time to scream. That soft, poochy sound remained between the two of them, and did not spread to the surroundings. The blood from the blade had not flowed out yet, because everything had happened too quickly. Lu Yiqing's first strike was extremely domineering and resolute. One strike broke a wall. Then his second strike was so fast that no one could react. The pain seemed to spread faster than the sound. Hengmu Liren's face turned paler. He clearly felt the coldness and sharpness from his chest, and the pain with a faint smell of blood. Yes, the pain had a smell. But he did not panic or fear. On the contrary, he was delighted. Because Lu Yiqing's second strike seemed to be more powerful than the first one. He thought it was the respect that he longed for the most. He became excited, and his eyes became abnormally bright. Every pupil of his seemed to become a star, closing in on the pitch-black ground, about to burn the countless summer grasses in the field. Lu Yiqing's sword could no longer move forward, because the sword had touched Hengmu Liren's blood. The blood was burning. It was the divine flame of Haotian. With a sizzling sound, the green smoke rose. The sword pierced into the divine body. It was stained with the divine blood and burned into invisible smoke. Hengmu Liren's thin blade pierced through the golden flower formed by the divine flame. At the same time, the 12 thin blades behind him opened up and bloomed like golden flowers. The burning divine flame was a beautiful flower. He stood in the flower and his blade moved closer to Lu Yiqing. An unimaginable and indescribable strong will appeared in front of the sedan. Was it the will of Haotian? As Lu Yiqing thought about it, his lips curled into a smile. Under the illumination of Haotian's divine flame, the smile looked a bit complicated. It was hard to tell if it was self-mockery or mockery. His left hand was holding his right hand. His right hand was holding the burnt sword. The sword was burned into ashes by the divine flame like a candle. His broken right hand was also burned by the divine flame. His white finger bones were exposed. Then the finger bones turned black and sharpened. Lu Yiqing waved his hand. The burnt finger bones flew out like a sword and floated to Hengmu's eyes. The word float was usually used to describe light objects. It was rarely used to describe a sword, even the lightest flying sword. But Lu Yiqing's last strike was indeed a floating sword. While he was waving his sword, the weeping willows by the moat around the imperial city floated in the night wind. The willow branches touched the moat and created some ripples. The white cloth on Lu Yiqing's face floated up. He brushed away the divine flame of Haotian on the blade. Hengmu Liren's eyes turned solemn for the first time. Lu Yiqing's strike was as unpredictable as the wind. No wonder he was the most powerful man in the sword garret. Hengmu Liren was solemn and then excited. Lu Yiqing was badly wounded and could not defeat him tonight. But this strike was a real test for him. He wanted to defeat this strike perfectly and let this man suffer the pain and humiliation. Hengmu Liren shouted. Countless blazing white rays of light shot out from his hands. The blade carried that great will as it slashed down. His sword moved like the wind? Then he would cut off the wind. Facing the wind, he would cut it off. It was dead silent. The wind was cut off. Of course it was silent. Countless weeping willows by the moat were cut off. They fell into the water and floated like duckweed. The white cloth covering Lu Yiqing's eyes was cut off. It floated to his chest and then stopped. A sword was stuck in his chest. His right hand. Blood kept flowing out from it. His body was covered with wounds. Most of them were cut off by Hengmu Liren's blade. But the fatal one was his own sword. Why? Hengmu Liren looked pale and asked, Why didn't you stab me in the last strike? Lu Yiqing said, I told you, you don't deserve it. As he spoke, he coughed up blood and smiled. A mocking smile. A pitying smile. Hengmu Liren shouted angrily, Why don't I deserve it? Lu Yiqing said, You don't have to repeat the same words. Hengmu Liren was silent. Lu Yiqing smiled and said, Do you feel bad that you can't kill me? Tonight there were so many powerful men from the divine halls of West Hill. He came alone and he knew he would not survive. But he still came. Because the South Jin Kingdom was huge and someone had to make a statement. He knew clearly why the divine halls of West Hill arranged this battle. It was a grand ball. The imperial city of South Jin was the stage for Haotian Taoism to show its power to the human world. He walked onto the stage, but he did not want to be a supporting character. He killed the emperor of South Jin Kingdom first and then himself. So nobody could kill him. Hengmu Liren could not do anything on the stage. How could he be the leading man? He was Lu Yiqing, a man who was destined to be recorded in history. So at the last moment of his life, he had to take all the glory on the stage. That was his last strike to the divine halls of West Hill. Hengmu Liren looked a bit lonely. Tonight was supposed to be his first battle as a powerful cultivator. But he did not expect that the ending was already written and it had nothing to do with him. At this moment, he suddenly understood why the Abbey Dean said those words when he left Peach Mountain. He also understood why the Abbey Dean asked that person to follow him in the darkness. The path to becoming a powerful cultivator was so difficult. He did not want to give up. Chapter 10:18. Hengmu Liren lowered his head. The golden flower in his hand was nowhere to be seen. He stood in the darkness and looked lonely like a wronged child. His voice was still stubborn and unwilling. No matter the first strike or the last one, you can't hurt me. You are no match for me. That's why you don't dare to attack me. Don't try to disturb my Taoist heart with your words. Lu Yiqing kept coughing up blood. His face was as white as snow, and there was a hint of pity that even the night could not conceal. I'm going to die. I didn't use my sword before, and I won't use it again in the future. Then, no one will ever know the answer. You also don't know whether you can catch my sword. In the future, you may be able to dominate the world, but tonight's regret will always be with you. The walls of the imperial city had collapsed. Bricks and gravel were everywhere. The water in the moat became still. The willow branches that had been cut off gradually sank to the bottom of the water. In the deathly stillness, flowers suddenly bloomed. The flower seemed to be one with the darkness. It was not pink or golden, but pure black. The petals were too dense to count. One could vaguely tell that it was a peach blossom. The spade appeared in the darkness. The man also walked out from the darkness. The silver mask on his face was not as bright as before after years of weathering. It was covered by a layer of mist like an old object. Just like the black peach blossom, this man used to have a dazzling golden color. But now he gave the golden color to others and kept the pure black to himself. His clothes, his eyes, and his aura were all cold and heavy, like the ink in an inkstone that was about to dry up. Lu Yiqing looked at the man who walked out from the darkness. His expression turned complicated and solemn. It was completely different from when he faced Hengmu Liren. He sensed that this man was purer and more powerful than before. He could not help but worry about the Tangs in the academy. Long Qing walked to the front of the imperial city in the darkness. Hengmu Liren did not respond. He was still staring at Lu Yiqing on the sedan. Long Qing looked at his lonely back and the green robe that had just been stained with blood. He was silent for a while, and then looked at the moon in the night sky with regret on his face. Tonight, the divine halls of West Hill sent an important figure like Hengmu Liren to Lincoln. They also sent 5 cultivators in the Knowing Destiny state, including Zhao Sisho, and 2,000 cavalries to attack from thousands of miles away. They set up a powerful tactical array around the imperial city, and he had been standing in the darkness. Other than returning the South Jin kingdom to Haotian's embrace and killing Lu Yiqing, who betrayed the Divine Hall, there were other reasons, such as killing the powerhouses who came to rescue the Sword Garret. Few people dared to help the Sword Garret before the Divine Halls. Precisely speaking, it could only be those from the Academy. And Long Qing believed that the one most likely to appear in Lincoln was Ningquebec. The Academy still had to follow the rules and reason. The Divine Halls of West Hill had arranged so many rules for the Academy, but the Academy could not understand them. Therefore, they could only watch the Divine Halls destroy the New Stream, and the Divine Halls invade the South Jin Kingdom from the north. Ning Ke was the only one who did not follow the rules and reason. Therefore, Long Qing believed that he would most likely appear in Lincoln tonight. He was satisfied and looked forward to it. However, just like how Hengmu Liren was disappointed that Lu Yiqing did not stab him in the last attack, he was also disappointed because Ning Ke did not show up. The Academy will not send anyone here. It's such a waste for the Divine Halls to send so many people. Lu Yiqing's mouth was bleeding, but his voice was still clear. Long Qing looked at him and said calmly, "I don't think it's a waste, because I will never underestimate any opponent, especially you, who is underestimated by many." Lu Yiqing was Lu Bai's younger brother. He was a nobody when he was young and was blinded by Ning Ke at the side door of the Academy. As Long Qing said in the darkness, he entered the palace alone and killed the emperor of the South Jin Kingdom, which ushered in a new era. But his reputation was not high enough. In the eyes of many cultivators, he was not as good as Ning Ke and Long Qing, and he was not qualified to take over Lu Bai's position in the human world. But Long Qing did not think so, because he had a similar experience as Lu Yiqing. He was defeated by Ning Ke and had to pay a heavy price to rise again. Lu Yiqing was blind, but he was able to break through the Knowing Destiny state and obtain the creation of Sword Taoism. Long Qing knew how difficult it was and how strong his will must be. You are the master of the Sword Garret. Your sword represents your will. You didn't stab Hengmu because you wanted to kill the emperor and the royal family. Long Qing looked at Lu Yiqing and said, "Those people on the city wall are dead. The South Jin Kingdom will fall into internal strife and will not be peaceful in a short time. It is not convenient for the Divine Hall to borrow the military and national power of the South Gene Kingdom. Is this the will of the sword Garrett to hurt yourself to hurt the enemy? The white cloth on Lu Yiqing's face was torn and dripping blood. He said, "The last 6 words are very incisive. But what I said to Hengmu was right. Many years ago, the Divine Hall wanted to promote you as the Son of God. Many cultivators died in your hands. Now the Divine Hall wants to push you out. Why should I help you?" Long Qing said, "This is what I don't understand. The gate of the South Gene Kingdom has been opened. Since there is no turning back, why don't you choose to leave? Why do you want to die for the Tangs? Many years ago, my eldest brother sent me to the academy to wash my sword. But I was injured by Ning Ke and became blind. Although my heart of sword was clear, I still could not see through it. But you still chose to stand on the academy's side. It was not my choice. It was my eldest brother's choice." Lu Yiqing shook his head with difficulty and said, "I don't understand why my eldest brother wants to help the academy. But since you want to do it, I will do it." Long Qing said, "The Tangs are untrustworthy. What is the meaning of your persistence?" "The meaning lies in me." Lu Yiqing looked a little tired. He said indifferently, "I don't like the Tangs. I don't like the academy. I don't like the Divine Hall. I don't like you guys. I don't understand why my eldest brother wants to help the academy. I don't understand why everyone in the South Gene Kingdom wants to help the Divine Hall. My eldest brother is dead. They treat the Sword Garrett as a ghost city. I see no one in front of me, no one behind me, and no one beside me. I have become a lonely soul, a wild ghost, but even a lonely soul can do something. If the Tang army invades, the disciples of the Sword Garrett should fight back. If the West Hill comes, we should also fight back. Even if we can't win, we have to fight first. It's stupid to court your own death. I heard that when the Abbey Dean entered Chang'an, millions of Tangs died. Now that the Divine Hall has entered Linкong, millions of people in the South Gene Kingdom have no choice but to watch. I think someone has to show their attitude. It's better to have one person die." Lu Yiqing felt his lungs burning. His ruptured heart was like a collapsed dam. He paused in pain and said with difficulty, "Since I'm going to die, of course I can't let you have it too easy. I misjudged my physical condition. After reading that chapter the day before yesterday, I began to think about the story seriously. Then my blood pressure started to become unstable. The fluctuation. I really want to curse." Chapter 10:19. Long Qing looked at the bloodline on Lu Yiqing's neck and said, "People like you and me should live and see the great era." The curtain of the new era had been lifted. You were the one who opened the curtain, and I was the one who acted. We should watch the scenery behind the curtain together, so that we would not waste our time in this world. What Long Qing said was a high compliment to Lu Yiqing. But Lu Yiqing only forced a smile and did not say anything. Then he looked at Hengmu Liren and said, "The play has just begun. But my part is over. Even if you are unwilling, you have to learn to accept it." Hengmu Liren trembled slightly. He suddenly raised his head and stared at Ning Ke. "The show is not over yet. How can a mortal change the will of Haotian?" His voice was trembling. His eyes were complicated, filled with reluctance and brutality. He was like a boy who went up to the mountain to chop firewood and saw the cicadas on the withered trees. He had sympathy, but more self-pity and anger. As soon as he finished speaking, a beam of holy Haotian divine light shot out from his palm and landed on Lu Yiqing's chest. Lu Yiqing's face became thinner at a speed visible to the naked eye. At the same time, Lu Yiqing's injuries healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Everyone's expressions changed, especially the divine priests from the West Hill Divine Palace. They could feel the aura of life contained in the Haotian divine light, and they were so shocked that they could not speak. Long Qing's expression became grave. "Do you know what you're doing?" he asked. Hengmu Liren ignored him. He stared at Lu Yiqing's face and forced out the Haotian divine flame from his body. His face became thinner, but his eyes became brighter. This was the real divine skills of the West Hill. In the cultivation world, no one was better than Hengmu Liren in divine skills. Even Yi Hongyu was not as good as him, because he had directly inherited the will and light of Haotian. The divine skills of the West Hill could kill people, but also save people. The divine flame in his body contained the aura of Haotian and could heal all the immortals. Lu Yiqing was dying, but he was not. Hengmu Liren would not allow Lu Yiqing to die like this. For this, he would have to pay a heavy price and consume a large amount of Haotian's divine flame. The visible shriveling of his face was one thing, but the invisible loss of his life was the most important thing. Besides, he would be severely injured soon. After being blinded by Ning Ke, Lu Yiqing's eyes no longer felt anything. But at this moment, he suddenly felt that his eyes were a little hot and itchy. He even vaguely saw a blurry white light. Was it the color of the white cloth or the holy radiance? Lu Yiqing was still calm. He even looked indifferent. He knew clearly that Hengmu Liren would not let him live comfortably after paying such a huge price. "It's meaningless," he said. If a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state did not want to live, then no one could stop him from dying. Hengmu Liren's face twitched slightly and looked horrible. He looked like a badly wounded demon in the holy divine flame. His voice sounded like crying, and it was very unpleasant. "You ant-like mortals have no idea what kind of realm I'm in right now. I want you to live, so you must live. You can't die even if you want to. So what if I'm alive? Will it make you feel better? Maybe you won't fight with me in the end, and refuse to use your failure to prove that Haotian's will is irresistible. But I will let you suffer endless pain to tell the world what will happen to those who betray Haotian. I want you to live, so you must live. Because I represent the will of Haotian. I want you to live, not to witness some damned great era. I want you to live in humiliation. I want you to suffer the pain of being cut into pieces every day. I want you to watch the South Jin kingdom fall apart and the disciples of the sword Garrett die one after another. I want you to watch your homeland turn into scorched earth and your friends become dead people. I want you to live because I want you to regret living." Hengmu Liren looked at the wound on Lu Yiqing's chest shrinking and the bloodline on his neck getting thinner. He laughed and said, "Will you regret what you've done tonight? If you have another chance, will you still disrespect me like this?" The most talented young man in the divine halls of West Hill laughed proudly. He was extremely happy and crazy. The compressed air passed through his trembling vocal cords and his voice was as sharp as a flock of pigeons. It was very ear-piercing. Looking at this scene and listening to the laughter, people felt a chill in their hearts. Many divine priests of West Hill felt that their Taoist heart was about to collapse. Even Zhao Sisho's lips were covered with a layer of frost. It was dead silent in the royal city at night. Only Hengmu's crazy laughter was echoing. The willow branches on the moat swayed timidly. The broken willows that fell into the water sank even faster to the bottom of the moat. They wanted to hide their bodies in the mud that had accumulated for thousands of years. They did not want to hear Hengmu's laughter anymore. Lu Yiqing felt the breath of life returning to his body. He listened to Hengmu's words and laughter without any change in his expression. There was no fear on his face, only calmness. He looked at Long Qing through the white cloth and said, "Is this the hope of the divine halls?" Long Qing said nothing. Lu Yiqing repeated, "A poor child with childhood trauma?" Long Qing still said nothing. It was a silent agreement. Lu Yiqing sighed and said, "The divine halls are getting worse with each generation." Long Qing still said nothing. He agreed with Lu Yiqing. He thought for a while and raised his right hand. There was a black peach blossom between his fingers. The petals contained the aura of quietus. Only the black peach blossom could interrupt Hengmu Liren's divine skill. "Don't stop me!" Hengmu Liren roared. His skinny face was as pale as snow. He stared at Lu Yiqing's face. He could not understand why this man from the South Jin Kingdom could still be so calm when he was on the brink of death and suffered so many mental shocks. He could not understand why he could sense the sympathy from Lu Yiqing. What were they sympathizing with? Long Qing said, Taoism needs you to spread the glory, not to go crazy. Hengmu Liren laughed crazily and said, but I feel great right now. I finally understand that only a crazy person like you can be truly powerful. The black peach blossom between Long Qing's fingers was shaking in the night wind. Don't stop me, Hengmu Liren said. Even though you are my senior, I have no respect for you and I don't need to. Since this is what the divine halls have arranged for me, you should stay out of it. Long Qing looked at him, as if he was looking at a stubborn, naive, and cruel child walking on the mountain path. The dew wetted his shabby indigo robe. He held the hatchet and thought he was the sun. Long Qing sighed from the bottom of his heart. But he did nothing in the end. At this moment, a sigh was heard in the deep of the night. Therefore, the mountains, rivers, rocks and rivers in Linkhong all sighed. Chapter 1020. This sigh was clear and shallow, like the water on the flower. The reflection of the flower on the water came from the depths of the night, washing the quiet night even more clean. The bright moon hanging in the night sky became even cleaner, like the ruins of the imperial city filled with dust. Because of this, the weeping willow gently brushed the surface of the river, as if nothing had happened tonight. After hearing the sigh, people reacted differently. Some were shocked, some were afraid, some were silent, and some were pale. They quietly retreated to the back of the crowd, because they knew that the person in the darkness must be from the Tang Empire, from the Academy of Chang-un, but they didn't know who he was. Long Qing knew who it was. Looking at the source of the sigh in the night, he knew that the person was not there. His expression became extremely solemn. Many years ago, at the foot of the snow-capped peak in the wilderness, the person appeared with a sigh and ended a war between the Taoism and the Devil's doctrine. Years later, in the White Tower Temple, the person appeared again with a sigh and trapped the preaching priest of the Xiankong Temple and let Ning Ke and Sang Sang go. Tonight, the person sighed and appeared again. What would he do? The dying Lu Yiqing smiled after hearing the sigh. It was not because he finally found someone or proved something, but because he was sure that his wish would come true. Hengmu Liren also guessed who it was. Only that person in the cultivation world could break through the defense line of 2,000 papal cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill silently and come so close to him. He took a deep breath and the 13 thin knives became brighter. The golden flowers in front and behind him became more magnificent. He was ready to attack the source of the sigh. He did not reveal any fear on his face. His thin face revealed a strong desire to fight due to the rapid consumption of his divine flame. However, the excitement in his eyes had completely vanished. His expression, which had appeared particularly cruel due to his naivety, instantly became calm. No matter how proud and confident he was, he had to focus all of his energy when facing this legendary figure. Only then would he have any hope of defeating his opponent. Long Qing looked into the darkness and said, "Let go." This sentence was not meant for the man, but for Hengmu. Lu Yiqing was seriously injured and was about to die. Hengmu didn't want him to die. He wanted Lu Yiqing to live and endure endless torture. At this moment, the sigh that moved the mountains and rivers came from the darkness. The meaning was clear. That man wouldn't allow such a cruel thing to happen. Hengmu was expressionless. His palm was still on Lu Yiqing's body. He looked into the darkness and said, "The Academy really sent someone here. Isn't this what the Divine Hall wants to see? Why should I let go?" Long Qing said, "I'm waiting for Ning Ke, not him." Hengmu said, "What's the difference? They are all traitors of the Academy, and this person is much more important than Ning Quebec." Long Qing said, "A more important person must be more powerful. No matter who comes from the Academy tonight, I will try to stop him." But since it is him, it is meaningless. In the depth of Hengmu's eyes, there were broken pieces of stars burning like a raging fire. His voice also turned into a bonfire that was blown by the wind, howling powerfully. He looked into the darkness and said, "I want to try to keep him here." A look of pity appeared in Long Qing's eyes. He pitied Hengmu's bravery and ignorance. At this moment, the man sighed again in the darkness. He seemed a little helpless. The so-called helplessness was like the feeling of an adult watching a child playing around. Of course, there was also some pity in it. Hengmu clearly felt this emotion. His face turned extremely gloomy, but his mind became calmer. Since he wanted to keep his opponent here, he had to be extremely calm. The man finally spoke, "Do you have any unfulfilled wishes?" This kind of question would usually be asked after a duel between two powerful cultivators. The winner would look at the loser and ask this question with sympathy, which would make the audience feel that the two heroes appreciated each other. However, if this kind of question was asked before the duel, it would be full of disdain and mockery. Hengmu did not misunderstand that the man was mocking him. Although the slow and calm tone did sound sarcastic, Hengmu knew that it was not, because the man was not that kind of person. This question was asked to Lu Yiqing. Lu Yiqing raised his head and looked at the city of Linkhong in the darkness through the white cloth. Although he could not see it now, he had seen it many times before and remembered many details of the city. As a cultivator, he had entered the knowing destiny state several years ago. As a sword master, he had gone to his death with only one sword tonight and destroyed the imperial city with one sword. He had already understood the true meaning of swordsmanship. As a man, he had killed 2 emperors of the South Jin Kingdom in his life and was destined to be written in history. He had no regrets. As a person, he had fulfilled all his wishes. However, as the master of the sword garret and a citizen of the South Jin Kingdom, there were still many people and things that he could not let go of. He did not say too much because he believed that if the Tang Empire and the Academy could win this war, they would naturally handle it well. If not, there would probably be no South Jin Kingdom and the sword garret in this world. If that was the case, why should he say more? Therefore, he did not say anything. He pressed his thin lips together and waited for the final relief with joy. A sigh was heard again in the darkness. This sigh was full of emotion and respect, as if it was a farewell. A gentle breeze rose from the moat and went up to the night sky. It blew away the clouds that were trying to entangle the moon and the gravel on the ground. It came to the imperial city and the sedan. Hengmu Liren suddenly became serious. He shouted and more than 10 thin swords were unsheathed at the same time. The swords shone brightly in the night wind. He held the swords horizontally with both hands and slashed at the breeze. It was a slash against the wind. Even if you are the real breeze, you will still be cut in half by my slash. Even if you are a legend in the cultivation world, how can you pass through the confinement formed by the blade intent and divine light? The bright blade illuminated the night. Hengmu Liren's eyes were shining. His blade intent and divine light gushed out. He felt his entire body was illuminated as if he was about to fly away with the wind. He had never felt so perfect before. However, nothing happened. The breeze was not cut off, and nothing passed through the confinement. It was still perfect. It just stopped in the darkness and looked so lonely. Because before he waved his blade, the breeze had already passed by. Before he used the confinement formed by the blade intent and divine light, the figure had already appeared in front of the sedan. Before he launched his perfect strike, the battle was already over. A scholar stood in front of the sedan. He wore an old cotton-padded jacket covered with dust. There was a wooden stick in his belt and an old book. He looked gentle, just like a common private tutor in the countryside. Looking at him, Hengmu Liren's hands that were holding the hilt slightly trembled. It was not because of fear, but because of anger. He asked coldly, "Mr. First of the Academy?" The scholar was the eldest brother of the Academy. The eldest brother ignored him. He looked at Lu Yiqing on the sedan and said, "Sorry." Chapter 10:21. Lu Yiqing was still alive. But he was badly injured. Hengmu Liren used Haotian's divine flame to keep him alive, which was more painful than death. The eldest brother showed up in Linкang, in front of the ruins of the imperial city, and stood between Hengmu Liren and Lu Yiqing. Haotian's divine flame was cut off, and Lu Yiqing was about to be freed. Because of the liberation, or because of what happened before the liberation, the eldest brother apologized to Lu Yiqing sincerely. Hengmu Liren did not want Lu Yiqing to be freed, which made him very angry. The eldest brother ignored him, which made him feel that he was not respected enough, which made him even angrier. He said coldly, "Mr. First, you're too late. Or, you didn't dare to show up before this. So what's the point of showing up now and apologizing to a dying man? Don't you think it's hypocritical? Or are you trying to comfort yourself?" In any case, the academy did not do anything tonight. Lu Yiqing would definitely die. Hengmu Liren's sarcastic words were the sharpest blade that pierced right into his heart. But the eldest brother did not seem to hear him. He looked at Lu Yiqing, who was covered in blood on the sedan, and repeated, "I'm sorry." Lu Yiqing said calmly, "Mr. First, you know that it's my own choice." The eldest brother thought for a while and said, "The academy could have stopped you from making this choice." Lu Yiqing shook his head and said, "The headmaster once said, 'What's there to complain about?'" Hearing this, eldest senior brother did not know how to respond. Lu Yiqing said, "The academy can't solve all the problems in the human world. Everyone has to fight for the problems in the human world. Mr. First, why do you blame yourself?" The eldest brother said, "But how can you stand aside when the dam is collapsing?" Lu Yiqing said, "That's why Mr. First is not as good as Mr. 13. The eldest brother shook his head and said, "Youngest brother is different now." Lu Yiqing was slightly startled. He thought of something and smiled on his blood-stained face. He sighed and said, "So Mr. 13 has been watching us from Chang'an." The eldest brother said, "Maybe I can't see it clearly, but he must be looking over here." Separated by the blood-soaked white cloth, Lu Yiqing looked at the ruins of the royal palace in the darkness and said with a smile, "Fortunately, I thought ahead of time that he might be looking here, so I didn't choose the wrong place." He had been cultivating for a long time, but he hadn't been able to shine in the cultivation world for long. He had once chosen the wrong position and paid the price for it, but he never missed it again. Tonight, he sat in the carriage. This was his seat. The chariot was facing the city wall that had been through the vicissitudes of time. It was located in the north facing the south, and had good feng shui, making it suitable for burial. Eldest brother looked at him and said, "Sorry, don't worry." Until the end, the academy still felt sorry for him. If the academy told him not to worry, then he could be at ease. Whether it was the future South Jin kingdom or the homeless disciples of the sword Garrett, he did not have to worry about them anymore. Under the blood-stained white cloth, Lu Yiqing's eyes slowly closed, and he fell into darkness. Over the years, he had already gotten used to the darkness, so he was fearless. Death and slumber were no different. Eldest brother looked at Lu Yiqing, who was no longer breathing, and remained silent for a long time. Then he turned around slowly, looked at Long Qing and Hengmu, and said, "Why?" When he said "why," he was looking at Hengmu. Looking at the young genius of Haotian Taoism who had inherited the gift from Haotian, he looked calm and peaceful. Although he could see through Hengmu's indigo Taoist robe and the endless Haotian divine flame in his body, Hengmu Liren was full of light. He was the chosen one of Haotian. Hengmu Liren was full of light. However, the academy and Haotian had been enemies for decades since Kohaoren drew his sword and questioned heaven. Looking back, the academy and Haotian had been enemies for 1,000 years since the headmaster of the academy built the academy and set up the god-stunning array in Chang'an. The academy was not afraid of Haotian, so why would it be afraid of a chosen one of Haotian? The academy did not respect Haotian, so why would it respect a chosen one of Haotian? Eldest brother looked at Long Qing and was slightly moved. He had read extensively since he was a child. Even though he had never cultivated in Taoism, he had read many Taoist classics. Otherwise, how could he debate with Yi Su for 3 days in front of a small Taoist temple? He had never cultivated in Taoist heart illumination, but who in the world could beat his wisdom eye? He could see through the infinite light under Hengmu's indigo robe, so he could see the infinite darkness under Long Qing's robe. Eldest brother had never seen such a thick and dirty darkness on the butchers of the devil's doctrine or on the villains. Through the ordinary priest's robe, he could vaguely see that in the dark fog around Long Qing's body, there were countless resentful souls crying and seething with resentment. Eldest brother looked at Long Qing and sighed. Why? Long Qing was a bit uneasy. He felt that he had become naked in front of Mr. First. He had no more secrets. Whatever he had done and what he wanted to do, Mr. First knew clearly. So he slowly took a step back. Behind him was the thick darkness of the night. Only by getting closer to the darkness would he feel safer, and even warmer. But it was not enough. Long Qing still felt a bit cold. It was uncomfortable to be seen through. He slowly operated his Taoist psyche and hid all his aura in the deepest part of his body. The aura in his body caused the night wind to swirl around in front of the imperial city. The gentle breeze seeped into his robe, and even the light seemed to be swallowed by his body. Long Qing became more and more blurry in people's eyes. He was about to merge with the darkness. Hengmu Liren made the opposite choice. When Long Qing took a step back and hid himself in the darkness, Hengmu Liren took a step forward. He took a step toward the eldest brother with an indifferent and proud expression. Countless rays of Haotian's divine flame burst out from his body. Holy star-like rays of light overflowed from his facial features and pores. With an indescribable pressure, he appeared in front of the imperial city. Hengmu turned into a burning statue of an immortal that could burn and purify everything. The level he revealed at that moment was enough to shock the entire cultivation world. He knew clearly that it was not difficult for him to kill Lu Yiqing in his true state. But it was not easy to kill this scholar in a cotton-padded jacket. Because a legend was a legend after all. Hengmu still wanted to give it a try because he was very angry. He was angry that the other party looked at him calmly, but was slightly moved when he looked at Long Qing. Anyway, everything that happened tonight made this proud successor of Haotian angry. He had to let Mr. First of the Academy feel his anger. And he knew clearly that even if he failed, Mr. First would not hurt him. In other words, Mr. First would not dare to hurt him. Otherwise, why would he apologize before Lu Yiqing died? There will be an update tomorrow. Chapter 10:22. Compared to the dazzling Hengmu Liren, Long Qing, who was gradually disappearing in the darkness, was like an insignificant stain. But in the eldest brother's eyes, Long Qing was actually more dangerous. Of course, he would not ignore Hengmu, who was standing in front of him. The Academy was used to being enemies with Haotian, but it did not mean that they would look down on Haotian. The lad in indigo was the most beautiful petal among the flowers in the spring rain. He was Haotian's gift to the human world. He was regarded as the legendary chosen one or the successor by the believers. Even though he was the eldest brother of the Academy, he had to pay enough attention to such a person. Hengmu Liren displayed an extremely powerful state, and in an instant there was another change. The burning Haotian divine flame returned to his body at a speed that could not be seen by the naked eye. It was hidden under his skin and into the blade. His body and the blade did not turn black, but turned into something like colored glaze. The sacred Haotian divine flame kept refracting inside. Countless rays of light overlapped and became brighter and brighter, gradually turning into the purest white. When the rays of light suddenly burst out of the colored glaze, how horrifying would it be? The eldest brother's right hand was still half a foot away from the wooden cudgel in his belt. He clearly sensed the horrifying state that Hengmu Liren was about to display. But it was puzzling that he remained silent and did not make a move. Maybe it was because of his confidence as a legendary figure, or because of the smell of wine in the darkness. Hengmu Liren's body became more and more transparent. The broadsword in his hand and the 12 thin broadswords on his back had already turned into ice. The pure white and blazing light kept refracting inside his body and the broadswords. The light became more and more intense, and almost reached its limit. Some of the light leaked out and instantly illuminated the ruins of the imperial city in the night. Meanwhile, the smell of wine in the darkness became thicker and thicker, just like the holy rays of light. No wind could blow it away, until it was so thick that it could not be dissolved. Those who looked at Hengmu covered their eyes in pain because of the divine flame. Those who smelled the smell of wine were intoxicated, as if they had entered the divine kingdom. In this way, they were temporarily separated from the real world. The eldest brother was in the real world, surrounded by the holy rays and the intoxicating smell of wine. He looked calm and gentle. No one knew what he would do next. Before the smell of wine wafted out of the darkness, he had already sensed it. Because he had been chasing after the smell of wine for the past few days. Otherwise, why did he apologize to Lu Yiqing before he died? The divine halls of Westhill had set up such a huge array in Lincoln. They not only wanted to kill Lu Yiqing, but also wanted to kill the powerful cultivators of the academy. So why did he come? Or was it because he wanted to say sorry to Lu Yiqing, so he came? Until now, when he smelled the wine and looked at the white light, he suddenly realized that the divine halls of Westhill could indeed keep him here. Because the person in the darkness was fast and Hengmu Liren was more powerful than he had imagined. Many years ago, In and Mu Yen came into the Ling Ling of the king. With the light. Xing, he. Mu Liren. A Ling Ling shining, he and Hengmu Liren were right in front of him. The eldest brother squinted his eyes. He was not nervous at all. He was like a village teacher looking at a naughty boy. Hengmu Liren felt a little sentimental. He took a step to the right. The world in front of Hengmu Liren had turned into a world of light. The scholar's face turned pale, but not pale. That was why Hengmu Liren became alert. He did not understand why Hengmu Liren was not alert at all. He was now an important figure in Haotian Taoism and knew a lot of secret. That was why he was sure that Mr. First would not dare to make a move. That was why he apologized to Lu Yiqing. Even if Mr. First had to make a move now, it was too late. This was not a trap set by Haotian Taoism, but an opportunity formed by coincidence. Even God could not predict it, so how could he escape? No one could predict when it was. Just like no one knew when the beginning of all things was. Even Hengmu Liren did not know. Even though he was alarmed, he could not stop. At a certain moment, or perhaps the moment when eldest brother took a step forward to the right, tens of thousands of holy Haotian divine halos broke through the shackles of his body and the blade. They overflowed the surface of the colored glaze and gushed toward eldest brother's body. In the next moment, the blazing Haotian divine light would illuminate the dark night sky. Whether it was the beautiful moon or the eternal stars, they would all be eclipsed. He would illuminate the entire world. And the entire world would be able to see where he was. Only such a horrifying power could burn Mr. First of the Academy into ashes. The wisp of wine fragrance in the night also became thicker in an instant. An old wind made of dust came out of nowhere and lingered around eldest brother. There was an indescribable power hidden in it. The eldest brother still did not move and did not dodge. On one hand, he might not be able to dodge the endless divine light shot out by Hengmu under the influence of the old wind. On the other hand, a gust of wind alone was not enough. He wanted to see more. He wanted that person to show himself and be seen by the whole world at the same time, just like Hengmu. This was an extremely short period of time. It was not an instant, nor was it a moment. It could not be described with words because nothing could be faster than light. Regardless of whether it was eldest brother or the person from the source of the old wind, it was impossible for them to be faster than light. This meant that the ending was already decided. No one could stop all of this, but someone made a move and tried to change everything. It was not because he was faster than light, but because he swallowed all the light shot out by Hengmu Liren into his own body. Suddenly, Long Qing stood in front of Hengmu Liren. His body was surrounded by a layer of black fog. The burning Haotian's divine flame was swallowed by the black fog. His face turned extremely pale. He gradually appeared from the black fog and looked like a ghost. There was a slight buzzing sound. All the Haotian's divine flame shot out by Hengmu Liren was swallowed by Long Qing. Only a few strands of divine flame escaped and faded away. It could not even light up the willow trees by the moat, not to mention the entire human world. The imperial city ruins suddenly became quiet again. The moonlight and starlight shone on the ground again. The dusty old wind slowly stopped, and the fragrance of the wine disappeared to who knows where. Hengmu Liren looked at Long Qing in front of him, and sensed the sense of annihilation and the horrifying aura from the black fog. He was so shocked and angry that he could not control himself. He had been preparing his attack of light for a long time. Together with the legendary figure in the night, he was about to burn Mr. First of the Academy into ashes. But it was ruined by Long Qing in an unimaginable way. He was shocked by Long Qing's horrifying state and angered by his behavior. What was he trying to do? Long Qing had swallowed so much Haotian's divine flame in such a short time. Strange light spots appeared on his pale face. It seemed that he was seriously injured. He lowered his head tiredly and panted for a long time. Then he looked up at the eldest brother and stared into his eyes. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Ning Ke, has he been watching us all this time?" Chapter 10:23. Not long ago, Lu Yiqing said, "Mr. 13 is watching us from Chang'an, isn't he?" But at that time, people around the imperial city were too nervous because of the eldest brother's sudden appearance and did not think too much about it. They took it as the master of the sword Garrett's reminiscence before his death. It was not until Long Qing said something like that people vaguely understood something and became extremely afraid. After the spring drizzle, Hengmu Liren had turned from an ordinary Taoist manservant into an unfathomable powerhouse. His acupoints were all connected and he was wise. He immediately understood what Long Qing was talking about. His body stiffened and his face turned pale. He subconsciously looked to the far north. In the far north, there was a magnificent city named Chang'an. He had never seen it with his own eyes, but at this moment, he could clearly see the moss-covered bricks of the city wall, the figure on the city wall, and the iron bow in the figure's hand. Only then did he realize that if it were not for Long Qing, he would have been dead by now. Even though he was thousands of miles away, he almost died. Long Qing stared into eldest brother's eyes and said, "No wonder you've been so calm from the beginning to the end, without any vigilance. You've been waiting for the moment when we attack. When you took a step forward to the right, I thought you were going to escape into the void. Now I understand that you were just giving way. Making way for the iron arrow thousands of miles away." Long Qing's clothes were soaked in sweat when he recalled what happened. If he did not interrupt Hengmu Liren's divine skill, what would he be like now? The eldest brother looked at him and said, "I didn't expect you to see through it and break it." It was difficult to see through the Academy's plan. What was more difficult was to make a decision in such a short time and to have the ability to break Hengmu Liren's divine skill. He had been wary of Long Qing's growth and now, he was even more certain that Long Qing would bring trouble to Ning Ke in the future. "I should be happy to receive Mr. First's praise," Long Qing said sadly, "but maybe it's because I know more about the iron arrow. That's why I thought of this possibility. It's not a big deal." The first time the iron arrow appeared in the world of cultivation was in the snow mountain of the northern wilderness several years ago. It was shot at him. His cultivation career, or rather, his life, had been fundamentally changed because of that arrow. Eldest brother said, "That's right. You still can't defeat youngest brother's arrow." Long Qing said, "It seems that he is indeed watching us from Chang'an." Eldest brother said, "I've said it before. Perhaps he can't see it clearly, but he will always be looking here." Long Qing looked into his eyes and asked in confusion, "Is this the Academy's plan?" But if Mr. First did not show up, Lu Yiqing would not be able to force Hengmu to be seen by Ning Quebec. The eldest brother said, "The Divine Hall's thinking is very clear. You want to kill Mr. Lu. It would be better if you could lure the youngest brother here to kill him. This is your plan. The Academy is just taking advantage of the situation. Since I have finally been forced to show up, you will naturally be seen." As long as they were seen, they would be shot to death. Such a thing had happened before. At that time, second brother Jun Mo brought his newly married wife to Qinghe Prefecture. He stepped into the manor by the stream and calmly announced his identity. Because his name was Jun Mo Elder Chui from Qinghe Prefecture and another powerful cultivator of the knowing destiny state, who had been hiding for a long time, showed all their powers without hesitation and became the real light. The iron bow was on the Peach Mountain, under the divine halls of West Hill. The person holding the iron bow saw the two lights in Qinghe Prefecture. The next moment the lights went out and the person died. The Academy is indeed sinister. The fear in Hengmu Liren's eyes turned into anger. He stared at the eldest brother and shouted coldly, "For this plan, Mr. First, who claims to be benevolent and righteous, watched Lu Yiqing die without doing anything." The eldest brother paused for a moment and said, "You're wrong. It's not that I don't want to do anything. It's that I can't. If I could, you wouldn't have been seen by Chang'an." Hengmu understood what he meant and became even angrier. Long Qing understood what he meant and said, "You don't have to do anything. You are here, which means you are going to do something. Otherwise, we wouldn't dare to do anything to you." The eldest brother said, "Even if I didn't do anything, I don't think you would have missed this opportunity." Long Qing said, "Even if Hengmu was shot to death and I was killed by Mr. First, do you still have the confidence to live?" The eldest brother said, "There is no such thing as absolute certainty in the world." Long Qing said seriously, "Is it worth it for Mr. First of the Academy to exchange our lives?" "You're right. When I took that step, I was ready to leave. But you couldn't make me stay. What I mean by unsure is what will happen next." The eldest brother looked into the darkness and said, "I don't know if he will force me to stay." The fragrance of the wine wafted through the night, followed by an extremely aged voice. That voice was like a wine that had aged for countless years, mellow to the extreme, but also like a wine urn that had been placed for countless years, full of decay. "So you have been waiting for me to do something." The eldest brother looked into the darkness and said, "Yes. If you don't do anything, the Academy will never be able to do anything." A scholar walked out of the darkness. It was hard to tell how old he was. He seemed to be extremely old, but also seemed to have an endless lifespan. It was a very strange combination on him. There was a flagon in the scholar's hand. He was a drunkard. The drunkard walked to the eldest brother and stood still. The eldest brother's cotton-padded jacket was full of dust, but it looked clean from the inside out. The drunkard's clothes were spotless, but they looked dusty from the inside out. From the moment he knelt down in front of Sang Sang, the drunkard became the most powerful force in Taoism. It was because of his existence that Hengmu was sure that the eldest brother dared not do anything. The eldest brother did not do anything. It was the youngest brother who was ready to do anything. Tonight, Taoism was ready to kill the youngest brother of the Academy, but it was the eldest brother who came. No matter who it was, they were willing to kill him. But they did not expect that the Academy wanted to kill him as well. Tonight, the Academy was ready to kill the drunkard. The drunkard was a powerhouse who had lived through the everlasting night. He was a legend in the history of cultivation, and an important weapon to balance the situation in the human world. Killing such a person was undoubtedly a revolution. Unfortunately, the revolution did not succeed. The drunkard brought the flagon to his lips and drank it for a long time. Until his belly swelled and his pale face recovered, he sighed and said, "That was close. That was really close." The eldest brother sighed and said, "Almost. Almost." Chapter 10:24. The Abbey Dean was crippled in Chang'an. The drunkard and the butcher, who surrendered to Haotian, became Taoism's most powerful fighters in the human world. If they could not solve this problem, especially the drunkard who traveled in the human world, the Academy could only watch the divine halls destroy the new stream, hunt down the followers of the new stream, and force the sword garret to fall apart. Lu Yiqing had to enter Lingkong alone and become a dead man. Jun Mo led tens of thousands of serfs to fight against the Buddhism sect in the depths of the western wilderness for many years. Yu Lian disappeared in the eastern wilderness. No one knew what she was planning. The only people in the academy who could solve this problem were the eldest brother, Li Man, and Ning Ke, who stayed in Chang'an. The eldest brother wanted to save Lu Yiqing and more people. To save people, he had to kill first. He could kill, but he couldn't. No matter how many powerhouses there were in the distanceless state, they could only be killed by a wooden stick. However, he could kill, so could the drunkard, and they were both in the distanceless state. If the Academy did not want to see the generals, officials, and even the most common people of the Tang Empire die, then they had to keep silent and watch Taoism advance step by step. The Academy had tried to communicate with the drunkard and the butcher to persuade them, but failed. The communication would continue, and so would the persuasion. But if it did not work, the Academy would have other options, such as killing the drunkard and the butcher. However, it was too difficult to kill such people. If the Abbey Dean had not entered Chang'an, the Academy would not have been able to hurt him. The drunkard and the butcher were the same. People who had reached such a state were almost demigod. They could sense the changes of fate, and it was difficult to kill them. What happened in Lingkong tonight had nothing to do with the Academy. It was a trap set up by the divine halls of Westhill. What the Academy did was to take advantage of the situation set up by the divine halls of Westhill in order to achieve the desired result. It was precisely because of this that the divine halls of Westhill failed to predict it and the drunkard failed to sense it. They used the destruction of the sword garret and the killing of Lu Yiqing to force the Academy to act. The divine halls of Westhill gathered in Lingkong, and the drunkard hid in the depths of the night. Taoism painted a giant dragon, but the Academy wanted to be the first to draw the eye. Unfortunately, it was still not enough. The finishing touch. Ning Ke stood on the city wall and looked to somewhere far away in the south. He was silent for a long time. In the end, he chose to give up. He loosened the bowstring and put the iron arrow back into the quiver. From tonight on, the drunkard would be extremely vigilant, and it would be hard for him to find another chance like this. Tonight was the best chance for the Academy. However, he did not manage to kill or injure the drunkard, which made him feel extremely regretful. But his expression was still so calm without any change that the Tang soldiers on the city wall did not know what had happened and did not understand why he suddenly drew his bow. When he was in the city of Lingkong, he saw a glaring light. Of course, he did not see it with his naked eyes, but with the help of the God-stunning array. He sensed the light in his sense of perception. The light was pure and holy. Since Sang Sang had left the human world, she must be the young Taoism man named Hengmu Liren. Ning Ke was not afraid to kill Hengmu, even if it would bring forward the war between the divine halls and the Tang Empire. For some reason, he hated the young Taoism man whom he had never met. Or maybe it was because of the rumor in the cultivation world that the young man was a gift from Haotian to the human world. He did not shoot Hengmu to death, because Long Qing hid Hengmu's position in his sense of perception. Of course, if he really wanted Hengmu to die, he could have loosened the bowstring when Hengmu was fighting against Lu Yiqing. But he did not do so, because the drunkard had not made his move yet. He had to save his first arrow for the most powerful enemy. And there was another important reason. Lu Yiqing's sedan was in the north, facing the imperial city. It blocked the way of his arrow. Maybe it was because Lu Yiqing did not want him to waste such a good chance on Hengmu, or because Lu Yiqing wanted to have a fair fight with Hengmu, or just because Lu Yiqing wanted to do so. Seek kindness and get it? No, you are seeking death. Ning Ke looked at the south under the night sky and said sarcastically, "You are seeking death because you want to leave the South Jin Kingdom and the sword garret to the academy. Do you think I don't understand?" After leaving the city of Wei for many years, he had seen many things in the world and lived in the Buddhist chessboard for many years. Logically speaking, even if his appearance did not change much, he should be more mature. But it was the opposite. The freckles on his face that represented innocence were long gone, and his cute dimples were so shallow that they could hardly be seen. There were some light scars on his face, which made him look much more mature. But his sarcasm and contempt towards Lu Yiqing made him look frivolous, as if he had returned to the carefree days in the city of Wei. After saying this, he suddenly fell into silence. The emotions on his face gradually faded, and he became a little numb. He looked like a real old man who could not find much joy in life. Even if he understood, so what? He could only accept it, because Lu Yiqing was dead, and more people had left or were about to die. He could not refuse and could only accept it silently. Eldest brother left Chang to stall the drunkard and left the little emperor to him. Second brother killed people in the west wilderness and left seventh sister to him. Third sister went to the east wilderness and left the brush and ink to him. Chao Xiaoshu went to the small town and left old Master Chao, his wife and daughter to him. Master and His Majesty died, and left the Array-I Pestle, leaving Chang and the Tang Empire to him. Tonight, Lu Yiqing died again and left the South Jin Kingdom and the sword garret to him. Standing on the city wall, he looked after the entire human world, so he could not leave. Before he started the journey with Sang, he had been a prisoner in Chang'an for a period of time. But there was a difference. At that time, he could only look after Chang'an, but now he could look after the entire human world. Of course, his responsibility was heavier. The city wall was too high for a tree to be taller. In the cold autumn, there were no withered leaves or ripe fruits on the top of the city wall. There were patrolling Tang soldiers, but no one to accompany him. He was alone. Ning Ke stood by the city wall and looked at the human world under the night sky. He did not speak for a long time. If he knew that Lu Yiqing used to compare himself to a wandering ghost in Lincoln, he would probably feel the same way. He looked after the human world, but who was looking after the old brush pen shop and the house by Yenming Lake? Who was looking after the willow trees by the lake, the lotus fields by the lake, the broken wall in the backyard, and the stray cats on the wall? Sang was gone. Who was looking after him? Chapter 10:25. The fire lit up behind Ning Ke, leaving a clear shadow on the city wall in front of him. A small table was placed on the city wall, and silver charcoal was burning in the stove on the table, but there was no smoke coming out. The soup in the copper pot was boiling, and beside it were some vegetables and meat slices. The warmth gradually rose. A Tang soldier put the dipping sauce in front of the bowl and chopsticks, looked at him and asked, "Sir, do you want to open the wine tonight?" "Yes." Ning Ke had been living on the city wall these days, and his daily life was like this. He had long been used to eating in the chilly autumn wind, and only hot pot and wine could add some warmth to his body. The extremely fat beef and mutton were soaked in the white but not greasy bone soup, and were cooked at a speed visible to the naked eye. Just as the fragrance was about to overflow, it was suppressed by the leaves of the vegetables in the pot. Ning Ke sat at the table and began to eat. There were no guests, so there was no need for greetings, no company, and no need for drinking games. Although the food was delicious, it was very quiet and lonely. Although the banquet was lonely, The wine was the strongest double-distilled wine, and the dishes were the delicacies sent from the palace. The saliva-inducing fragrance floated up with the steam from the copper pot, swept over the city wall, and was frozen by the chill of the autumn night. The fragrance floated down to the human world under the city wall, passed by the mottled traces of wind and rain, and the old and new moss-covered city wall, and passed by an eagle's nest, causing the eagle in the nest to open its eyes and look around blankly. Then it floated down to the Vermilion Bird Avenue and into the noses of the few pedestrians on the night street. That year when the Abbey Dean entered Chang'an, the southern part of the Vermilion Bird Avenue was basically destroyed in that tragic battle. After several years of continuous reconstruction, it finally returned to its former glory. However, it was, after all, a newly built building. After all, it lacked the smoke and fire accumulated over the years, and seemed a little cold. Dinner time had passed, and the markets on both sides of the Vermilion Bird Avenue were also very quiet. However, compared to the desolation on the main street, those houses were not deserted at all. The sound of chess pieces falling on wooden plates, porcelain bowls falling on the edge of the stove, and women scolding children could be heard everywhere. It was very lively. In Chang'an on an autumn night, the real lively place was not these houses. Several round tables were placed on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes. Some young master secretly took money from the accountant's office and invited his friends there. After all, he was young and inexperienced, so he naturally did not know how to drink. He was not the headmaster of academy, so he could not tell how much water was mixed in the wine. He got so drunk that he forgot how to explain to his family tomorrow. The liveliness in the House of Red Sleeves was different from that in the building of pines and cranes. Those officials and businessmen who did not know that their children had sneaked out of their mansions to play were sitting at the tables by the railings. The atmosphere was warm, but no one made a fuss. Among the beautiful music and spinning skirts, the liveliness was only the first half of the word. Compared to the common people, the atmosphere in the imperial court was naturally much more serious, especially the brightly lit small buildings in the meadow. It seemed that the lights would probably stay on until dawn. Dozens of Tang soldiers ran quickly between the small buildings, passing back information from all over the border and counties, urging for approval. The West Hill Divine Palace had already started the war. Although the flames of war had not been officially ignited and had not yet reached the border of the Tang Empire, the Tang military ministry had already entered a state of war. The atmosphere was tense and solemn. The hot tea on the table had been changed many times, but no one had eaten the pastries beside it. The most important decisions could not be made by the military ministry alone. They had to go through the imperial palace. The generals could not sleep, and naturally, many people in the imperial palace could not sleep either. From the Yulin royal guards to the bodyguards, from the eunuchs in charge of the imperial academy to the palace maids in charge of tea, everyone had to stay awake. Compared to the past, there were 2 more banners on the wall of the imperial study. The 2 banners were written by different people, and the level of their writing was very different. But they were equally important to the imperial palace now. They were the fish leaping and flowers blooming. His Majesty was no longer young, but he was still a teenager. The academy did not allow him to stay up for a long time, so he had already fallen asleep. It was Li Yu who was reading the memorials in the imperial study. Her face was still as beautiful as ever, but because she had lived in the palace for a long time and rarely saw the light of day, she appeared a little too pale and very thin. She read the memorials and the political documents of each county attentively. After a long time, she felt a little thirsty. She reached out for a cup of tea, but knocked over the bowl. Then she realized that it was not tea in the bowl, but the tremella soup that the palace maids had brought in earlier. The tremella soup was a little thick, so it fell on the memorials and was easy to clean. On the city wall, the soup in the copper pot also overflowed. As soon as it came into contact with the hot pot, it made a sizzling sound and quickly evaporated, leaving behind grayish-white stains. Some of it flowed down the legs of the table and landed on an iron arrow. Ning Ke did not care about it. He continued to eat the delicious mutton, the fat beef, and the mellow liquor. He ate very slowly. Since he was going to sit on the city wall, it was always good to find something to do. It was just a meal. No matter how slowly he ate, it would be finished sooner or later. When he put down the chopsticks, several Tang soldiers came to clean the table, leaving the pot of liquor and a dish to go with it. He took out a handkerchief to wipe his mouth, and then the table. Finally, he picked up the iron arrow and wiped the soup off it. Then he put it on the bowstring to ensure that he could shoot at any time. He looked to the south again, in the direction of Lincoln. The drunkard did not become bright before, so he would not have the chance to see him tonight. But he had to keep watching. Until now, he did not know what had happened in Lincoln. But he knew that Lu Yiqing should be dead. Because the eldest brother could not do it, because Lu Yiqing wanted to die. Ning Ke poured the liquor on the ground as a memorial. Lu Yiqing was dead, but the drunkard was not. What a pity! But it did not matter. Even if he could not kill him tonight, he could kill him someday. The liquor wet the ground, and the green bricks of the city wall turned black. The moonlight was even whiter, like frost. Then he noticed that the moon was not very round, but very bright. The bright moon shone on the human world. To shine was to watch and to take care of. Ning Ke filled his cup with liquor and looked at the bright moon in the night sky. He said, "Master, please keep watching us. We will continue to watch the human world for you." In the far south, the city of Lincoln was in chaos. Fires were everywhere. Only in front of a gate of the imperial city, which had been turned into ruins, there was no sound. It was so quiet that it was frightening. The drunkard said, "The problem is, how long can Ning Ke watch?" The eldest brother was silent. No one could watch forever. The drunkard looked at him and asked emotionlessly, "And who else can let him see me except you?" Hearing this, the eldest brother's expression changed slightly. He begged, "Please don't." His green robe was not wet, and the pot of liquor was not opened. The drunkard disappeared in the wind. Chapter 10:26. The drunkard left, but the eldest brother didn't. He walked to the front of the carriage and laid Lu Yiqing's body flat on the ground. Then, he turned to look at the ruins of the imperial city in the darkness. He listened to the sound of the wind rustling the river. He was silent, as if he was waiting for something to happen. His expression was slightly sad and helpless. Long Qing knew what he was waiting for, so he was even more puzzled about why he didn't leave with him. He looked at his cotton-padded jacket and the dust on it, and his expression gradually turned solemn. Among the three who stayed, Hengmu was the youngest and the proudest. He suffered the biggest setback tonight, so he looked a little lonely and furious. It was not until this moment that he realized that the academy had been targeting the drunkard from the very beginning. He had never been in their eyes. He clenched his fists slowly and thought to the eldest brother, "Even if you have entered the legendary distanceless state, do you think you can defeat me easily? Do you know what state I am in now?" Long Qing sensed the change of Hengmu's mood and looked even more solemn. He looked at the eldest brother with vigilance and slowly walked to Hengmu's side, ready to attack at any time. During the period after spring, the divine halls of West Hill and the academy had been strangely peaceful. Before tonight, both sides knew that they were safe. As long as no one attacked first, the balance would not be broken. It was a balance between the two grand cultivators in the distanceless state. Tonight, the balance was finally broken. Looking back at the battles that happened in front of the ruins of the imperial city, it was still unclear who attacked first. Even though it was the divine halls of West Hill's plan, the distanceless one was the drunkard who felt the real danger. The academy almost injured or even killed him. Long Qing was vigilant. The balance had been broken. The eldest brother didn't leave with the drunkard, which meant that he and Hengmu would probably attack him and Hengmu. Could they survive? When the drunkard was still hiding in the darkness, he asked the eldest brother if it was worth it to exchange their lives. It meant that the eldest brother believed that he and Hungmu were capable of doing something. Hungmu's confidence came from his faith. But where did his confidence come from? You are very different from the rumors. The faint starlight fell on Long Qing's body, like a stream flowing into dry sand, and was instantly swallowed up. Looking at this scene, the eldest brother was puzzled and said, "If you can gain the power of darkness by betraying your faith in Haotian, who gave you this power? I don't think even the Abbey Dean can explain it." Long Qing was very clear that no matter how famous he was in the cultivation world, he was not qualified to be remembered by Mr. First of the Academy. The so-called rumor was probably something Ning Ke had mentioned in a casual conversation. He knew that the Abbey Dean had seen through his state. But as the Abbey Dean had said, if even the Abbey Dean could not explain it and he could not understand it, then no one could. "Why are you talking nonsense?" Hungmu said. The eldest brother looked at the lad in indigo and said, "The West Hill Divine Palace values beauty, but the real Haotian Taoism values indigo. The Abbey Dean has been wearing indigo all these years. Yi Hongyu also wore indigo when she was comprehending swordsmanship in the stone house by the cliff. Youngest brother also wore indigo when he fought his way up to the Peach Mountain. It's ridiculous for you to wear indigo at your current state." Hungmu was very angry. He laughed even more innocently and said, "Let's not compare with the Abbey Dean. But to say that the judge and Ning Ke are more qualified than me to wear this indigo robe, Mr. First's taste is really ridiculous." The eldest brother looked at him and said calmly, "Is passing that threshold the source of your confidence?" Hungmu was shocked when he heard that. He did not expect that the eldest brother could see through his real state that he had been hiding. He said indifferently, "Since you have seen through it, why shouldn't I be confident?" The eldest brother looked at him and said, "As the youngest cultivator in history to pass that threshold, you should be proud and confident no matter how you look at it. But it's a pity that you did not pass that threshold by yourself. You were carried over by Haotian. So you are still a baby now." Long Qing suddenly said, "I don't understand why Mr. First said this now. Because I don't understand why he dared to leave." Suddenly, the eldest brother showed an expression of understanding. He sighed and said, "Light and darkness are the two sides of Haotian. How stupid I am to only understand this now." Long Qing said, "Mr. First is wise." The eldest brother said, "If Hungmu had your current state of mind, it would be more troublesome." Long Qing said, "If that's the case, you shouldn't wait now. You should take action." The eldest brother looked a little lost and said, "Can I bear the price of taking action?" Long Qing said, "You know what he is going to do." The eldest brother nodded and said, "Yes." Long Qing said, "Since you are hesitating whether to take action, you should at least follow him." The eldest brother said, "Even if I follow him, I can't stop him. I can only be a passerby. That will be more painful." Long Qing said, "Isn't waiting here and guessing what is happening in the distance the most painful?" The eldest brother said after a moment of silence, "What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. It's always better if you can't see." Youngest uncle said that a gentleman should stay away from the kitchen. That's probably the reason. "Hypocrite!" Hungmu scolded bluntly. "The academy is a bunch of hypocrites." The eldest brother said, "Maybe. I am indeed a hypocrite. But I can't represent the academy. If it were June Mo or third sister here tonight, they wouldn't say as much as I do." Hungmu stopped talking, because he found that it was hard to treat a hypocrite as a hypocrite, and it was hard to have any malice towards him. It was quiet in front of the ruins of the imperial city. The night wind blew the river gently and the willow branches came to the scene. They floated over Lu Yiqing's blood-stained face and closed eyes, and then disappeared. Just like the passage of time, there was no trace. As Long Qing said, waiting was the most torturous thing. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait for too long. The drunkard came back. The flagon was swinging on his waist. Some blood stains could be seen on the hem of his robe. The eldest brother's face turned pale. He knew that the drunkard purposely let the blood stain his robe for him to see, but he still couldn't help blaming himself and suffering. The drunkard untied the flagon and said, "It's only a moment, but I'm still drunk." He took a sip of wine and squinted his eyes. The eldest brother was silent for a long time, and then he asked, "Who died?" The drunkard left to kill people. There were few people in the world that he couldn't kill. The one who died was also a good drinker. The drunkard recalled the scene when he killed people and said with emotion, "I went to Chuzhou before." The eldest brother said, "Chuzhou of the Tang Empire?" The drunkard said, "Yes. Chuzhou is surrounded by mountains, and there is a pavilion on the East Mountain. The pavilion was built by a governor." The eldest brother said with a trembling voice, "The governor of Chuzhou was honest and loved the people." The drunkard said, "He was as honest as water, and loved the people as his own children." The eldest brother said, "He was a true sage." The drunkard said, "A sage loved wine." He was indeed a sage. The eldest brother said, "But you killed him." The drunkard said, "If the governor of Chuzhou was not a sage, I wouldn't have killed him." The eldest brother asked with a trembling voice, "Why?" The drunkard looked at him and said calmly, "Because the more virtuous the person died, the more pain you will feel." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.